a woman floating in a crimson bathtub, a baby screaming on a bathroom floor, a killer staring at the one scene he never planned for. In a series obsessed with blood, the most devastating wound isn't physical at all. It's emotional. And it's delivered by the quiet character, almost everyone, including Dexter, underestimated, Rita Bennett Morgan. Let's kick things off with a paradox. From the outside, Rita looks like background, the safe girlfriend, the suburban wife, the woman who makes pancakes while the real story happens somewhere else. But if we track Dexter's trajectory honestly, every time he thinks he has Rita managed, protected, or neatly folded into his plan for control, that illusion cracks. Then it fractures. Then it collapses in a bathtub we can never unsee. Think about the pattern. Season 1, Dexter chooses Rita precisely because her trauma and low expectations make her the perfect shield, a partner too, wounded to investigate his late nights or emotional distance. Season 2, he tells himself that keeping her in the dark protects her from the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, even as his lies pull her deeper into danger. Season 3 and 4, marriage, a baby, the house in the suburbs. Each new layer of normal life is supposed to lock her safely behind his code. Instead, every step quietly moves her closer to Trinity. In this video, we're going to treat Rita not as a side character, but as the hidden spine of Dexter. Her childhood abuse, her first marriage to Paul, her passivity that slowly hardens into boundaries and demands for honesty, all of that forms the emotional counterargument to Harry's code. Dexter believes he can compartmentalize violence and love. Rita's story exists to prove that psychology wrong. To keep this clear, we're not just recapping what happened to her. We're dissecting how a girl taught to mistake survival for love grows into a woman who thinks quiet equals safe, and how Dexter exploits that belief. We'll follow the investigation into her past, the bruises Paul left, the way she flinches from touch, the way she apologizes for taking up space. Then we'll watch her reclaim that space, going back to work, setting boundaries, insisting on more from the man who chose her as his camouflage. Each major section will trace a different layer of this trap neither of them fully understands. Childhood trauma, the abusive ex-husband, Dexter's calculated decision to date her, her evolution into the moral center of his life, the escalating cracks in his fade. And finally, the Trinity arc as the catastrophic failure of his entire plan. Along the way, the central question keeps tightening around both of them. Did Dexter destroy Rita's life, or did Rita's existence expose the lie at the heart of Dexter's life? To understand why her death hits harder than any kill room, we have to go back long before Dexter ever smiled on her doorstep. Into a childhood where surviving pain was the only version of love she was ever taught to trust. Rita grows up in a house where volume is a weapon. Doors don't just close, they slam. Arguments don't resolve, they detonate. A raised voice means something is about to break, and a broken plate is always safer than a broken bone. In that environment, a child learns very quickly that the safest plan is simple: don't be noticed. Let's kick things off with that implied blueprint. We're never walked through Rita's childhood in detail, but the psychology is written between every line. A father who drinks, a mother who freezes, a room where you stay very still and listen for footsteps in the hallway. Conflict equals danger. Questions equal defiance. Needs equal provocation. So Rita's nervous system does what any smart, terrified brain does under chronic stress. It rewires around threat detection. She becomes a scanner, a reader of micro-expressions. Is he breathing harder? Is the jaw tighter tonight? Is this the moment everything collapses? To keep this clear, Rita isn't born passive. She's trained by repetition. Over and over, she learns that appeasing, shrinking, and staying quiet can delay the explosion. Compliance isn't a personality quirk, it's a survival strategy that works just well enough to feel like control. By the time she meets her first abuser, Paul, that code is already installed. She knows how to apologize for things that aren't her fault, how to smooth over his outbursts, how to convince herself that if she can just be better, calmer, less demanding, the violence might stop. When your entire childhood has been an investigation into how not to get hit, people-pleasing doesn't feel pathological. It feels responsible. This is where attachment comes in. Rita internalizes a brutal equation. Love is something you endure. Love is staying. Love is absorbing damage, so the people you care about don't get hurt worse. If someone is quiet, they're safe. If they're distant, they're merciful. So what happens when a man shows up who is emotionally absent, sexually patient, and never raises his voice? Dexter doesn't read as a red flag. He reads as a miracle. He doesn't demand. He doesn't interrogate. He doesn't erupt. He disappears. And to Rita's trauma-trained mind, disappearing is not neglect. It's kindness. The focus is not just on what Dexter hides, but on how perfectly her nervous system collaborates with that secrecy. She doesn't push, doesn't pry, doesn't investigate the gaps in his story, because curiosity was punished in her formative years. Each major section of her life has taught her the same lesson. Boundaries get bulldozed, not built. No one ever modeled how to say, "Where were you?" without bracing for impact. So when Dexter offers a quiet, opaque routine, she has no template for healthy skepticism. Why would she question the first man whose silence doesn't precede a beating? And that's the tragic irony. The very traits that helped her survive an unsafe childhood and an abusive marriage, numbing out, minimizing herself, accepting distance as proof of safety, make her the perfect camouflage for a serial killer who needs a low-maintenance partner. Along the way, the central question darkens. Did Rita choose Dexter, or did her trauma choose him for her? Because Rita's childhood doesn't end when she leaves home. It just changes actors. The stage stays the same. A house, a family, a woman bracing for impact. And the next man in that doorway will prove that abuse doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles, slips on a wedding ring, and promises that this time, everything is under control. So when Paul walks in, he doesn't look like a monster. He looks like the answer to that childhood promise. Someday, someone will stay. He's funny, he's charming, he's the guy who notices Rita in a room where she's trained herself to disappear. And in the beginning, that feels like healing. It feels like proof that the past was just a bad season, not the whole trajectory. But Paul is the classic cycle of abuse figure. The honeymoon phase is a plan. He's attentive, exciting, generous, love bombing her with affection and promises of a stable home. Then, the screws start to tighten. The drinking ramps up, the temper flashes. Control sneaks in as questions about where she's been, who she's with, why dinner isn't ready. By the time the first slap lands, Rita is already emotionally and financially trapped, with a ring on her finger and a baby on the way. To keep this clear, Paul's violence doesn't just appear, it escalates in a pattern. Apology, explosion, apology again. And Rita's learned passivity slides neatly into place. She rationalizes the bruises, minimizes the screaming, tells herself he's stressed, he's trying, he had a rough childhood too. If she just behaves better, keeps the house quieter, keeps the kids in line, the storm will pass. The central question in her head is never why is he doing this? It's what did I do wrong? Astor and Cody become the axis everything spins around. They're anchors, because leaving Paul means ripping apart the only family her children have ever known. Their shackles, because the terror of single motherhood with no money, no safety net, and no model of healthy love keeps her rooted in place. Every time she thinks about walking out. Another question hits. What if this is as good as it gets? What if breaking the home is worse than the bruises? The psychological cost is brutal. Each incident with Paul reinforces a warped code. Love is supposed to hurt, her job is to endure, and asking for more is dangerous. Her tolerance for pain becomes a survival skill and a prison. She stops expecting comfort. She stops expecting respect. She learns that invisibility is the safest form of control she can have. When she finally involves the legal system and Paul ends up in prison, it's not filmed as a triumphant liberation. It's a shaky, guilt-laced survival decision. She's terrified he'll come back. She's terrified she's ruined her children's lives. Along the way, she internalizes one more lesson. Protection always comes with consequences. So by the time we meet her in season 1, Rita isn't just shy or meek. She's emotionally hollowed out, convinced the safest relationship is one that barely exists. And into that wreckage walks Dexter, a man who doesn't push for sex, doesn't demand emotional intimacy, and seems endlessly patient. On paper, he looks like the antidote to Paul. In this video, we're going to see how that safety is exactly what allows something far darker to move in without a fight. That safety is the selling point. It's also the trap. Because from Dexter's perspective, Rita isn't just a damaged woman who needs time. She's the answer to a very practical problem. How do you maintain a killing schedule and still pass every casual investigation into your personal life? To keep this clear, we can almost hear the criteria in Dexter's head. He needs someone low demand, emotionally fragile, unlikely to push for sex, unlikely to interrogate his late nights or blank affect, someone conventionally normal enough, suburban, maternal, domestic, that standing next to her makes him look like a man with a life, not a hollow technician who disappears whenever the moon comes up. The plan is simple. Blend in through her. Enter Rita Bennett, single mom with 2 kids, an abusive ex in prison, and a nervous system still wired for survival. She's fresh out of a marriage where intimacy meant violence, where questions were punished, where her best strategy was to shrink. That history makes her sexually avoidant, grateful for any kindness, and laser-focused on keeping the peace rather than probing for the truth. For Dexter, that psychology is perfect. For Rita, it's a slow-motion disaster. Dexter tells us this openly. In his internal monologue, he calls her his cover, his camouflage, the thing that makes him look human to Deb, to Batista, to Masuka. The focus is not just on companionship, it's on optics. Rita is the floral print shield he can stand behind at barbecues and birthday parties, proof that the Bay Harbor butcher has a girlfriend who brings potato salad. The central question for him isn't who is she, but what does she make me look like? And yet, he also tells himself he's helping her heal. He gives her space, doesn't pressure her sexually, shows up for the kids. On the surface, that looks like gentleness. Underneath, there's a moral dissonance he never resolves. Is he protecting a vulnerable woman? Or exploiting that vulnerability to build the perfect logistical cover? Can it be both, without poisoning everything? From day one, they're reading the same behavior through opposite lenses. Rita sees his emotional distance as respect. She interprets his lack of sexual urgency as proof he's nothing like Paul. Dexter, meanwhile, reads her low expectations as operational freedom, fewer questions, fewer demands, more nights open for stalking and kill rooms. He thinks he's found a safe harbor. In reality, he's installing a blind spot in the one place consequences will hit hardest. home. That asymmetry is baked in from the first date. She thinks she's finally found safety. He thinks he's finally found a shield. They're both half right, and that half right is lethal. Because the very qualities that make Rita perfect for his plan, her trust, her passivity, her commitment to the image of a stable family, are the same forces that will push her to grow, to ask questions, to step into danger without knowing it. Dexter believes he can control this variable. Along the way, we'll see how Rita becomes the one part of his life he never truly controls, and ultimately, the instrument of a collapse he never planned for. So when we move into the early days of their relationship, we're watching Dexter live inside what feels like his most successful plan. Simple dinners at Rita's modest house, takeout containers on the coffee table, the kids running around with plastic toys while Dexter smiles on cue. This is domesticity, stripped down to routine, kid-friendly outings, PG-13 conversations, nothing too deep, nothing that might trigger an investigation into who he really is. To keep this clear, Dexter doesn't just enjoy this rhythm, he weaponizes it. Rita suggests the park, a movie night, a quiet evening after work, and he can schedule all of it around stalking, collecting blood, and preparing kill rooms. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, show up with flowers. The pattern is so predictable that the dark passenger and Little League snacks can coexist on the same calendar without colliding. Rita's low expectations become part of the code he lives by. She's grateful when he shows up at all. She apologizes when he leaves early. She assumes she's asking too much if she wants more than one date a week. That passivity is Dexter's shield. He can vanish at odd hours, miss calls, arrive with vague stories about overtime, and she fills in the blanks with generous explanations rather than suspicion. How many serial killers get that kind of emotional cover without even trying? But along the way, we start to see the quiet counter-trajectory. Over takeout and soft lighting, Rita begins to open up. She talks about Paul in hesitant fragments, about bruises, about the way her childhood primed her to accept cruelty as normal. She confesses insecurities about being too damaged, about not being good enough for a healthy relationship. She watches Dexter with Astor and Cody and, step by step, decides he's a safe male presence in a world that has only punished her trust. Dexter's response looks perfect from the outside. He listens, nods, offers the right comforting phrases. He holds her when she cries, but the psychology underneath is colder. These are data points, not invitations. He logs Paul's abuse as leverage, Rita's fears as parameters, the kids' routines as variables in a larger equation of control. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between performance and reality. Because the central question is always, who is actually changing here? The first microcracks show up almost immediately. Rita notices his flat affect when she shares something painful. She clocks his distant stare after a supposedly intimate moment. She hears a vague explanation about where he's been, and for half a second, you can see the doubt flash across her face. Then, she self-censors. She tells herself she's being needy, that good men like Dexter are busy, that questioning him might drive him away. This is Dexter's illusion of control at its peak. He believes he's balancing the dark passenger, the code, and this fragile family fantasy flawlessly. Yet the very stability he's providing is rebuilding Rita from the inside out. Safe nights, consistent support, a partner who doesn't hit her, these things restore her capacity to question, to set boundaries, to say, something feels off. The focus is not just on Dexter maintaining the mask, but on Rita slowly regaining the strength to look behind it. And as that safety solidifies, half answers will stop being enough. Each major section will show how that shift escalates, but the first real test of this new stability is about to walk back into her life, wearing a prison jumpsuit, and Dexter's neat little routine is about to meet its first real stress test. So when Paul Bennett walks back in, it's not just an ex-husband coming home from prison. It's Rita's entire past kicking down the door, demanding visitation rights. He shows up with a new story and a new performance. He's clean, he's changed, he deserves access to his kids. On paper, it sounds reasonable. In her body, it's a panic attack. We see that split second where old bruises, old nights on the floor, old police reports all compress into one forced smile. She tells herself this is different now. She has Dexter. She has stability. But the nervous laugh, the way her voice shrinks around Paul, that's the old survival code reactivating in real time. To keep this clear, Rita's first instinct is not to fight. It's to manage. She negotiates drop-offs, softens her language, explains Paul's presence to Astor and Cody like it's an awkward school event instead of a re-entry of their abuser. She insists she's stronger now, yet every choice leans toward appeasement. Can she keep the peace? Can she control the damage if she just cooperates enough? That's the psychology of someone who learned, very young, that resistance equals escalation. And this is where Dexter steps into a role he thinks he understands: protector. He becomes the buffer at the door, the one who will physically remove Paul when he gets aggressive, the one who hides Paul's heroin in his apartment to trigger a violation. Dexter has a plan: neutralize the threat, keep the family system intact. From Rita's perspective, it looks like a miracle. For the first time, there is a man who doesn't fold in front of Paul, doesn't blame her, doesn't tell her she's overreacting. He just acts. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these gaps between intention and outcome. Here, Dexter thinks he's simply shoring up his cover. What actually happens is more complicated. For Rita, this is a seismic shift. Dexter isn't just the gentle boyfriend anymore. He's the wall between her children and the monster she married. Every confrontation, every court hearing, every time Dexter calmly backs her story and undercuts Paul's, her emotional investment in Dexter skyrockets. And then we hit the growth moment. When Paul accuses Dexter of planting the drugs, Rita hesitates. But she doesn't cave. She chooses to believe Dexter. Later, she pushes back legally, enforces boundaries, refuses to let Paul rewrite the narrative of what he did. This is the first time we see her not just surviving a man's anger, but actively challenging it. The irony is brutal. Dexter's scheme works. Paul is neutralized. Rita and the kids are safer. But that success tightens the bond between Rita and a man whose secrets are infinitely darker than Paul's, just better hidden. The focus is not just on the danger that leaves, but the danger she now invites closer. Each major section will trace this pattern of protection and entanglement. Rita has finally learned to stand up to one abuser, but in doing so, she steps deeper into the orbit of a killer she still believes is her salvation, and the consequences of that trust are only beginning to unfold. From here, Rita's story stops being about escaping one monster and quietly becomes about outgrowing another. The survival shell that once made her the perfect cover for Dexter doesn't just crack, it starts to fall away piece by piece, and with every fragment that drops, Dexter's illusion of control loses another layer. We see it in tiny, almost throwaway moments. Rita reaches for Dexter first, on the couch, instead of waiting to be chosen. She pushes for actual dates instead of just convenient nights in. She tells him what she thinks about Deb, about Paul, about his late hours, without immediately apologizing for having an opinion. These are small gestures on screen, but psychologically, they're seismic. This is a woman who, for years, calibrated every move around not provoking violence. Now she's testing what it means to be safe enough to want. To keep this clear, we're basically watching Maslow's hierarchy play out in real time. When we meet Rita in season 1, her entire plan is survival, keep Paul away, keep the kids fed, keep the peace. Once Dexter helps lock down those basic needs, her brain does what human brains do when the threat level drops. It starts scanning for higher level needs: respect, reciprocity, emotional intimacy. She doesn't just want someone who isn't hurting her. She wants a partner who shows up, who is present with the kids, who meets her in the messy middle of real life. And this is where the central question of their relationship flips. For Dexter, stability is a cover. For Rita, stability is a launch pad. So when she asks, "Where is this going?" or "Why can't you stay for dinner?" she isn't nagging a distracted boyfriend. She's articulating needs that didn't used to feel allowed. She asks him to be more involved with Astor and Cody. She asks for clarity about weekends, about holidays, about why he keeps disappearing into vague work emergencies. Each question is reasonable. Each answer from Dexter is a lie. Inside Dexter, panic spikes. He built this entire domestic system on Rita needing very little, minimal sex, minimal explanation, minimal time. The more she heals, the more that low-demand equilibrium collapses. His schedule tightens. His cover stories have to get sharper. Every new boundary Rita sets is another variable his code never accounted for. But her assertiveness is still fragile. She'll push for an honest answer, then instantly backpedal if his face hardens or his tone shifts. She'll say, "You're never here," then follow it with, "I know you're busy, I'm sorry." Yet every push leaves a dent. Dexter has to adjust, to promise, to commit to new structures he never wanted. That's how we slip into a dangerous feedback loop. The more Dexter instinctively pulls back to protect the investigation in his own head, the more it scrapes against Rita's old abandonment wounds. His distance feels like Paul all over again, so she leans in harder, demands more clarity, more consistency, more proof he's really there. He responds with bigger gestures and bigger lies. And the next thing she asks for won't be another date night or apology. It will be structural. A decision about their future that forces Dexter to either deepen the performance permanently or watch his perfect cover walk away. So when Rita finally asks for something structural, the show doesn't tiptoe. It jumps. More nights at her place. More mornings making lunches. More scenes where Dexter isn't just the quiet boyfriend on the couch. He's the one tying Astor's shoes, checking Cody's homework, standing in the doorway as this improvised family starts to feel permanent. Let's kick things off with those incremental shifts. At first, Dexter's plan is simple. Sleep over just enough to look committed. Disappear just enough to keep the kill schedule intact. But the kids notice when he's not there. Rita notices when he ghosts. So, he adapts. Movie nights, school events. He becomes the consistent father figure Paul never was. Every time he chooses Little League over a late-night stalk, we watch the dark passenger lose an inch of control, even as the camouflage gets stronger. To keep this clear, these same milestones mean completely different things depending on whose psychology we track. For Rita, Dexter staying over is not logistics. It's proof. Proof that she isn't disposable, that her choice to trust again after childhood trauma and Paul's abuse wasn't a catastrophic mistake. When they start talking about living together, when engagement moves from fantasy to an actual ring, she's rewriting her own narrative, from woman men use and abandon to someone building a stable family by conscious choice. For Dexter, the trajectory is inverted. Every toothbrush left at Rita's, every box moved into that house is another camera pointed at his life. More eyes on his late arrivals, less time to prepare a kill room. More risk that a blood slide left in the wrong place turns into an investigation he can't manage. The focus is not just on the romance, it's on the quiet logistical collapse of his supposed control. The life he built as cover is hardening into a prison with floral curtains. And crucially, Rita isn't just drifting into this. She's choosing it. She goes back to work. She sets boundaries with Paul. She calls Dexter out when he vanishes. When she accepts his proposal, she's not clinging to the first nice guy who shows up. She's saying, "This is the man I want to raise my kids with." In that moment, she stops being the victim in Dexter's story and becomes the architect of a future he never planned for. Then, the baby changes everything. A pregnancy is not just another milestone, it's a literal new life binding Dexter to this family. Harrison means college funds, car seats, sleepless nights, and a bloodline that turns every secret into a potential inheritance. How do you justify the code when the consequences now include your own child watching you fail? Here's the paradox. Dexter feels real affection here, maybe even love. That makes the lie worse. Because now there is something genuine to lose. He keeps telling himself he can compartmentalize it all. Husband, father, serial killer, as if these are neat separate boxes. But every new ring of commitment around Rita tightens around his throat. And the first real choke point, the first time that suburban fantasy and the kill table collide head on, is closer than he thinks. And right on cue, the choke point arrives in tiny, almost forgettable moments. A late night here. A missed call there. A man who claims to crave family life, quietly slipping away from it whenever the urge to kill takes over. From the outside, it looks like normal relationship friction. From Rita's vantage point, it feels like déjà vu. Let's kick things off with the concrete behaviors, because this is where the investigation really begins, even if no one names it as such. Dexter disappearing for overtime at the lab, then coming home wired and distant. The night he's supposedly helping Deb with a case, but his phone is mysteriously off. The way he can walk into a crisis, Paul relapsing, a break-in scare, a child emergency, and remain almost unnervingly calm. These are the first hairline fractures in his suburban disguise. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on how Rita has changed by the time she notices. Early on, her psychology is shaped by Paul. If something feels wrong, it must be her fault. By the time she's gone back to work, set boundaries with her ex, and started initiating intimacy on her own terms, that reflex is colliding with a new sense of self. She feels the wrongness now. She just doesn't yet trust that feeling enough to follow it all the way through. So we get these small but crucial confrontations. Rita asking, quietly but directly, "Where were you?" When Dexter stumbles in late with another vague work story. Her pushing back when his explanations don't quite add up, pointing out that other parents manage to be present and honest. The methadone lie in season 2 becomes a turning point. She catches the bottle, asks if he's using. And for a split second we see it, Dexter's entire plan hanging by a thread on whether she believes him. In this video, we're going to keep tracking that pattern, because the central question here is not why Rita doesn't see the monster, but how Dexter keeps her focused on the wrong mystery. His tactics are simple and devastatingly effective, half-truths about stress at work. Deflections into his damaged past, leaning on the narrative that he's emotionally broken and trying his best. Every time she moves closer to the real secret, he shifts the frame to his trauma, and suddenly she's comforting him instead of interrogating him. Why does she back off? Fear. Mostly fear of losing the fragile stability she's built. Fear of becoming the nagging partner she was accused of being with Paul. Fear that if she pulls too hard on this thread, the whole life they've constructed will collapse. Along the way, Dexter benefits from that fear. Her internalized shame becomes his shield, and these are all near misses. In another version of this story, one more probing question about that methadone. One less convincing speech about recovery, and Rita is the one who blows up the code long before Trinity. But the next time her instincts flare, it won't be about his hours at work. It will be about another woman, and this time, Dexter's entire narrative about who he is and what he's capable of will be on trial. And that trial doesn't arrive as a confession or a body in the trunk. It arrives wearing combat boots and a British accent. Leela is the anti-Rita made flesh, chaotic, impulsive, and drawn not to Dexter's mask of control, but to the storm underneath it. Where Rita builds routine, Leela burns it down. She meets Dexter in the language of addiction recovery, but what she actually offers is a different code. Stop pretending. Stop performing. Surrender to the darkness. For a man who spent an entire season trajectory convincing himself that the problem is his feelings, not his murders, that sounds dangerously like honesty. This is the first time someone looks at his damage and doesn't flinch. That's intoxicating. To keep this clear, we need to sit with what Rita actually sees. She doesn't see kill rooms. She sees late-night calls that don't match Dexter's stories. She sees him canceling family plans for a sponsor he never mentioned before. She hears the emotional intimacy in his voice when he says Lila's name, the way boundaries they never had to articulate are suddenly being crossed. The investigation she runs is domestic, not forensic, but the pattern is unmistakable. Secrecy, rationalizations, emotional triangulation. Earlier, Rita would have bent herself around that. With Paul, she minimized, absorbed, and hoped compliance would equal safety. Here, she does something radically different. She names the behavior as toxic. She calls out the lies, the manipulation, the way Dexter is using his addiction as a shield for whatever he's really doing. And then she does the one thing Dexter never planned for. She removes him from her life. This is a moral line, not a legal one. Rita doesn't know about blood slides or plastic wrap, but she knows what it feels like when a man's private world starts to consume hers. She recognizes self-destructive psychology when she's standing inside it, and she refuses to let her house, her kids, her hard-won stability become collateral damage again. In that moment, she is not Dexter's cover. She is his judge. And Dexter panics. Not because he's heartbroken in a conventional way, but because the collapse of this relationship threatens his entire operational plan. Lose Rita, and he loses the family fantasy that keeps him anchored, the domestic routine that hides his nocturnal schedule, the one structure separating his ritualized killings from complete chaos. Lila offers him authenticity without restraint. Rita demands restraint without understanding the true stakes. Which is more dangerous to a man like Dexter? This is the central question of the Lila arc. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this kind of crossroads, where Dexter has to choose between the person who validates his darkness and the person who unknowingly asks him to be better. Along the way, his choices always look like control, but they're really fear. He chooses Rita, but he wins her back by deepening the lie, staging contrition and recovery, while Leela literally eliminates threats for him. Rita believes she's escaped the arsonist and chosen the safer man. We know she's just chosen the more disciplined monster, and that the real consequences of that decision haven't even begun to arrive. Rita believes she's chosen safety. Dexter believes he's engineered it. But under that quiet suburban plan, something much stranger is happening. Rita is becoming the conscience Dexter pretends to have. At this stage, Rita is defined by 4 core traits: She's a fiercely protective mother, a believer in second chances, an advocate for stability, and someone who still operates on a simple premise: people can choose to be better. Her history with Paul, the abuse, the relapses, the prison visits, has taught her how much damage a violent man can do to a family. But it's also convinced her that sobriety, routines, and honesty are non-negotiable. That's the life she's fighting for when she looks at Dexter. She thinks she's demanding basic decency. In reality, she's asking a predator to live by human rules. To keep this clear, Dexter doesn't suddenly grow a conscience because he loves Rita. The psychology is colder. He learns to externalize one. He watches her face when he lies about methadone. He tracks the way her voice changes when she talks about Paul or the kids being scared. Over time, he can predict her reactions the way he profiles a target. What would Rita think if I skipped the school event? What would Rita feel if she knew where I really was tonight? He doesn't feel guilt the way she does. He simulates it by running an internal Rita simulation and then adjusting his behavior to match. That's why her disappointment hits harder than any investigation. When Doak circles him, Dexter treats it as a tactical problem. When LaGuerta raises an eyebrow, it's a risk calculation. But when Rita's eyes fill with hurt because he fell off the wagon, that lands. Her wounded silence after Paul's overdose. Her anger when she thinks Dexter endangered the kids. Those moments destabilize him more than the Bay Harbor butcher case ever does. Police suspicion threatens his body. Rita's disappointment threatens the entire persona he's built. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this. Rita is the living embodiment of the life Dexter tells himself he's killing to protect. Family dinners, a house that isn't soaked in blood, a future where Harrison doesn't grow up in trauma. The focus is not just on Dexter hiding behind that image, but on how he starts to believe it. Every time he wraps an arm around Rita on the couch, he's rehearsing a version of himself who might have been real if the code, the killings, and the lies weren't devouring everything. And that creates a brutal double bind. The more Dexter uses Rita as his moral compass, the more catastrophic it becomes, that he's lying to her about everything that matters. How do you let your conscience know you've built the relationship on bodies at the bottom of the ocean? You don't. You just deepen the performance until the gap between who she thinks you are and what you actually do becomes its own kind of crime. Rita's forgiveness is the sharpest edge of that crime. It's not naivety. It's a deliberate stance. She chooses to believe Dexter can grow, that the recovering addict, the attentive stepfather, the man who shows up for custody hearings is the real him. So every secret kill isn't just a betrayal of trust. It's a rejection of her entire worldview, her insistence that people can choose better. And when your conscience is a person, not a principle, losing that person doesn't just hurt. It removes the last reason you had to pretend you were ever good at all. And then Dexter does the most dangerous thing a man like him can do. He makes that conscience his wife. Marriage to Rita doesn't just upgrade his cover story. It builds a whole domestic ecosystem around his lie. Shared house in the suburbs, baby Harrison's crib wedged between their bed and the baby monitor. School runs for Astor and Cody, hoe meetings, leaky faucets, and arguments about whose turn it is to pay which bill. On paper, this is Dexter's most successful plan. He looks irreproachably normal because his life is filled with the exact routines serial killers aren't supposed to have. But every one of those routines siphons off the same resource his night work needs: time, attention, emotional presence. You can't stalk a suspect across Miami and also be at Harrison's pediatrician appointment. You can't prep a kill room and still convincingly explain why you missed Astor's recital. To keep this clear, the show keeps cross-cutting, Rita packing lunches while Dexter hides blood slides, a family barbecue interrupted by a crime scene call, Harrison crying in the night while Dexter's mind drifts to his next investigation. And here's the twist. He cares now. The attachment is real. We watch him cradle Harrison, coach Cody, reassure Astor, and we can see the psychology shifting. He isn't faking every smile anymore, which means every lie lands differently. When he disappears for another late night at work, he's not just protecting a secret, he's betraying people he's actually bonded with. That makes the internal cost higher, the cognitive dissonance louder. The illusion of control thinner. Operationally, the strain is brutal. Fewer windows to kill, more chances of being seen. A wife who notices if you change shirts at 2 a.m. or come home smelling like the ocean. He's improvising excuses on the fly, car trouble, overtime, helping a friend. Each story has to be specific enough to be believable and consistent enough to survive the daily scrutiny of a co-parent who shares his bed. How long can that hold before one detail slips? Meanwhile, Rita's expectations evolve. She's no longer the fragile survivor grateful for any safe man. She goes back to work, asserts boundaries with Paul, and starts demanding Dexter show up as an equal partner. When his patterns echo Paul's neglect, missed calls, unexplained absences, she calls it out. The focus is not just on her trauma anymore. It's on what a real father and husband should be. This is Dexter's hubris phase. He believes he can have it all. Family, code, kills. He treats responsibility like another problem to be managed, not a structural limit on his trajectory. But every new obligation multiplies the points of potential failure, the places where one misstep could collapse everything. And into this overloaded system walks Arthur Mitchell, a family man, a ritual killer, a dark mirror of everything Dexter fears he could become. In this video, we're going to watch how Dexter's attempt to study Trinity, to learn from him, invites Arthur straight into the one part of his life he thought he was killing to protect. Before Arthur ever steps into frame, the real pressure cooker is already hissing. Dexter's life is an overbooked calendar of obligations and secrets, demanding homicide cases stacking up on his desk, Harrison crying through the night, Quinn sniffing around with a new level of scrutiny, and Dexter burning whatever's left of his bandwidth, tracking other killers who don't fit the code or threaten his fragile sense of control. On paper, it's just a busier season of life. New baby, more cases, a little sleep deprivation. But the psychology of Dexter's system depends on surplus, extra time to stalk, extra energy to clean, extra emotional distance to keep the mask from slipping. Remove that surplus, and every plan becomes a gamble. We watch him nod off at the wheel, misplace evidence, and show up late to family moments that were supposed to prove he could have it all. At home, the degradation is subtle at first. A missed pediatrician appointment he promised to handle. Groceries he said he'd pick up and didn't. A date night he forgets entirely because he's busy in a storage unit, obsessing over another killer's pattern. The focus is not just on Dexter being busy, it's on the way his attention is never really in the room with Rita. He's physically present, emotionally absent, and increasingly irritable in the gaps. Rita, who once accepted any crumb of stability, has changed. She has a job, a voice, a memory for details. So when Dexter snaps at her over something small or disappears with another flimsy explanation, she doesn't just shrink back. She confronts him. Why are you so tired? Why are you always gone? Why does this feel familiar? To keep this clear, the show keeps echoing one name, Paul, the abusive ex-husband whose lies, mood swings, and broken promises taught Rita exactly what danger looks like behind a domestic fade. Is it fair to compare Dexter to Paul? From our omniscient vantage point, yes and no. Dexter isn't hitting her, but he is gaslighting her reality. He's hiding addictions, just not the kind she can see. For Dexter, being placed in the same mental category as Paul is existentially triggering. The central question of his self-mythology is whether he's a monster with a code or a protector with dark methods. If Rita starts to see him as another abuser, that story collapses. Rita, meanwhile, is at war with herself. She does not want to believe she picked another dangerous man. So she oscillates. One moment rationalizing Dexter's behavior as new dad stress, the next moment sharply critical when he crosses a line, like driving exhausted with the kids or vanishing after promising to be home. Each confrontation is a warning shot, a chance to recalibrate, to confess something, to change course. And Dexter takes none of them. He doubles down. More lies, more secret investigations, more faith that he can outrun the consequences. Each major section will show this pattern, but here, with Rita, it's the final warning phase before catastrophe. Because the next family man who walks into their orbit will mirror Dexter too closely. A devoted husband, a doting father, a meticulous killer, and Rita will once again be asked to trust the wrong person. Only this time, the cost of misplacing that trust will echo all the way back to the bathtub where Dexter's own life began. So when Arthur Mitchell steps into the frame, it doesn't feel like a new villain. It feels like the logical endpoint of the path Dexter is already on. A man who has done it longer, hidden it better, and wrapped the horror in something Dexter desperately craves: a stable, ordinary family. Let's kick things off with how Dexter first reads Trinity. From the rooftop suicide ritual to the meticulous cycle of kills, Arthur looks like a model of control. Decades of murder. No real investigation closing in. A wife, a son, a daughter, a church community. On paper, he's what Dexter's plan wants to become. The Bay Harbor butcher with a mortgage, a legacy, and no visible cracks. In this video, we're going to lean into that paradox. Dexter doesn't just hunt Trinity, he studies him. He inserts himself into Arthur's life, watches him lead Habitat for Humanity projects, observes the family dinners, the prayers, the performative humility. The central question for Dexter isn't how do I stop this man? It's how has he done this for 30 years without losing everything? To keep this clear, Trinity is framed as a mentor before he's framed as a monster. Dexter sees a working prototype of the double life. Both men are husbands and fathers. Both compartmentalize with almost religious discipline. Both use their families as a kind of moral camouflage, convincing themselves that the love they provide somehow balances the ledger of what they do at night. Is that love real, or just another layer of the code? Dexter doesn't want to look too closely, and while he's shadowing Arthur, the strain at home spikes. Rita is juggling a baby, 2 kids, and a husband who keeps disappearing on work trips and last-minute errands. We watch Dexter skip the emotional labor of his own household so he can chase a fantasy of sustainable monstrosity. Every hour he spends in Arthur's orbit is an hour he's not seeing how rapidly his own family trajectory is bending toward collapse. Here's the moral blind spot. Dexter's investigation of Trinity is logistical, not ethical. He's cataloging techniques, how Arthur stalks, how he stages scenes, how he resets with family vacations. Meanwhile, Arthur's wife and children are telegraphing the real consequences in every flinch and forced smile. Their fear at the dinner table, their confusion when his temper erupts, their sense of entrapment inside that suburban house. This is the future Rita can't even imagine she's auditioning for. The focus is not just on Trinity's kills, but on the domestic damage Dexter refuses to read as data. Arthur's son terrified of becoming him. His daughter desperate to escape. His wife trapped in a marriage that looks devoted from the outside and feels like a prison from the inside. How different is that, really, from Rita trying to rationalize Dexter's secrets so the dream doesn't die? Along the way, the show plants the real answer Dexter keeps dodging. Trinity isn't proof that the plan can work. He's proof that it always ends in blood. Dexter thinks he's refining his system by walking a few steps behind Arthur Mitchell. In reality, Arthur is walking a few steps ahead of him, straight toward a bathtub that will demonstrate, in the most brutal way possible, that this life was never sustainable. So when we cut back to Rita, we're not just changing locations. We're stepping into the blast radius before the bomb goes off, and the tragedy is that she thinks the explosion already passed. The divorce from Paul, the abuse, the court battles, in her mind, that was the storm. This is supposed to be the calm. We see her leaning into that calm, planning a family trip, talking about taking the kids to Disney, or maybe just a quiet weekend away once the Trinity investigation wraps and Dexter's workload finally slows down. She tells him she's relieved things are stabilizing, that the chaos of the last season of their lives feels like it's finally behind them. Rita, the woman introduced as a trauma survivor who could barely be touched, is now initiating affection, holding the baby, asking Dexter about their future like it's something solid she can stand on. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on what she says, but on what Dexter doesn't. He's distracted, eyes already drifting toward Arthur Mitchell. Phone buzzing, mind calculating. Every hopeful sentence from Rita runs into the brick wall of his obsession. He misses openings to reassure her, to stay home, to actually inhabit the life he claims he's killing to protect. The plan in his head is clinical. Stalk Trinity, confirm the pattern, secure the kill room. The failure in his home is quiet, missed dinners, vague explanations, emotional absence. Rita feels it. She doesn't know the word Trinity, but she knows something is wrong. She comments on his late nights, on how tense he seems, on the way he's there physically, but not really present. She worries he's overworked, that fatherhood and marriage are overwhelming him, that maybe he's slipping back into secrets like the methadone lie. From her perspective, these are recognizable marital fractures: workaholism, communication breakdown, emotional withdrawal. Why would she imagine the real answer is a serial killer orbiting her family? That's the tragic irony. The central question in Rita's mind is my husband pulling away from me? The real question hanging over the season is, will Dexter's double life get her killed? She is trying to repair something she thinks is small, while we know the consequences are enormous. Along the way, we watch Dexter brush past multiple exits. He could stay home instead of chasing Arthur across state lines. He could admit how dangerous this man is and pull the family into a tighter circle. He could listen when Rita's fear spikes and treat it as a warning, not an inconvenience. Each major section will, later in the video, track how these almost choices define Dexter's trajectory, but here they're concentrated into a handful of days where everything is still technically reversible. This is the ultimate failure of the code as a life strategy. Every kill is supposed to increase control, yet the more Dexter invests in the plan, the more exposed Rita actually becomes. He's guarding the perimeter and leaving the front door open. And then, right when it feels like the danger might pass, the season snaps shut. Dexter believes he's handled Trinity. The family future Rita was sketching on napkins finally looks possible. We're about to walk into that house with him, hear a baby crying, and see a bathtub that doesn't just end a marriage. In the next section, we're going to break down how that single image doesn't just kill Rita. It detonates Dexter's entire mythology of control. Before we get to that bathtub, we need to rewind to the first time the universe tried to take Rita away from Dexter. Because the Trinity crime scene is not the beginning of that trajectory. It's the echo of an earlier night when Rita's life was already being pulled into the gravity of Dexter's secret without her consent. Let's kick things off by reframing the ice truck killer arc through Rita's eyes. She's a domestic abuse survivor, raising 2 kids, dating a man who works blood at Miami Metro. A serial killer is dismembering women and leaving body parts as taunts. Any normal partner would be rattled, hypervigilant, spiraling. Dexter, he's calm. Too calm. He's fascinated by the investigation, almost energized by it. That mismatch doesn't explode into a fight, but it lands. Quietly, in the background of their relationship, Rita's intuition is already picking up that the man she chose for safety is strangely unfazed by horror. Then, Brian Moser walks in, wearing Rudy's face. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this pattern. Dexter's family enemies don't just target him. They orbit the people he uses as cover. Deb brings Rudy into Rita's orbit as the charming new boyfriend, and suddenly, Rita is hosting dinners with Dexter's long-lost brother, unknowingly sitting at the center of a lethal family drama. To keep this clear, Rita isn't just collateral here. She's a pressure point, a way for Brian to test how much of Dexter's normal life can be contaminated before the fade cracks. That pressure peaks in one of the most disturbing early manipulations Dexter ever pulls. He takes the severed hand Brian left, recognizes it as a calling card, and instead of treating it purely as evidence, he weaponizes it against Rita's ex-husband. He uses the ice truck killer's work as leverage to frame Paul, pushing Rita to stand up to her abuser. On the surface, it looks like support. Underneath, it's strategy. Dexter is engineering Rita's emotional growth because it serves his plan. A cleaner, quieter home life, fewer disruptions to the code, less scrutiny on his nocturnal schedule. But the focus is not just on Dexter's control. It's on Rita's response. She doesn't crumble. She finds a vein of steel we haven't seen before, calls Paul out, reclaims her space, and starts rewriting the script that said she had to be small to be safe. Along the way, she becomes more than a prop in Dexter's cover story. She's moving toward being a genuine partner, a moral center, even as he deepens the lie. And that's the paradox. The more Rita grows, the more valuable she becomes as Dexter's emotional shield, and the more dangerous it is for her to stand that close to his darkness. Brian fails to kill her, but that isn't a victory. It's a deferred sentence, a proof of concept that Dexter's world and Rita's world can collide at any time. The ice truck killer only almost reaches her. The next great predator in Dexter's life won't miss. The ice truck killer only almost reaches her. The next great predator in Dexter's life won't miss. But before Trinity ever walks into frame, there's another man orbiting Rita who forces us to ask a brutal question. What does it look like when the wrong man is right about Dexter? To keep this clear, we need Paul's post-prison trajectory. When he comes back in Season 1, he's still violent, still volatile, still a walking trigger for Rita. But the show doesn't flatten him into pure monster. We see him trying, in his own broken way, to be a father. He plays with the kids. He remembers details about their lives. He begs for another chance, not just to sleep in Rita's bed again, but to be reinstalled at the center of this family. His plan isn't healthy, but it's coherent. Prove he's changed just enough that Rita will let him back into the house, into her routine, into her psychology. And that's exactly why he spots Dexter. From the moment Paul clocks this quiet, affectless boyfriend who never raises his voice, he recognizes a pattern. Control without volume. Distance disguised as stability. We can feel him thinking, I know this move, because it's the same structure he used on Rita before prison. Isolate her, make her doubt her instincts, present himself as the one fixed point in a chaotic world. Paul doesn't know there's a kill room. He doesn't know there's a code. But he knows an emotional chokehold when he sees one. The heroin setup is where that recognition explodes. Dexter frames Paul with the stash, engineering his arrest as a final solution to Rita's Paul problem. On paper, it's elegant: remove the chaotic abuser, secure the family fantasy, restore control. In practice, it creates one of the most unsettling confrontations in the entire season. Paul, handcuffed, bruised, insists Dexter planted the drugs. He repeats it to Rita over and over. This time, the addict paranoia script is actually the truth. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between who seems safe and who actually is. Here, Dexter weaponizes Rita's trauma history. He leans into the narrative that Paul is the unpredictable villain and he is the calm alternative. Every bruise Paul gave her becomes retroactive evidence that any accusation he makes now must be a lie. Dexter doesn't have to disprove Paul's story, he just has to let Rita's memories do the work. So, Rita makes the only choice that feels survivable. She believes the man who feels safe over the man who feels dangerous, even though the dangerous one is finally telling the truth. How could she do anything else when her entire trajectory out of abuse has been built on learning to trust the quiet, nonviolent option? The consequences are chilling. Paul dies in prison, sealed in Rita's mind as the definitive bad guy of her story. Dexter walks away as the hero who saved her from him. And yet we know, from the long investigation of Dexter's life that follows, that Paul was the only man who ever correctly identified Dexter as a threat to Rita's future. The loud abuser gets punished. The hidden predator gets the house, the kids, and the narrative, and he's the one whose orbit will eventually get her killed. If the wrong man can be right about Dexter, what does that say about everyone who never suspects him at all? That question hangs over one of Rita's most important choices. The night she proves she's willing to lose Dexter rather than relive Paul. We watch her open the door to chaos again. Paul out of prison, the kids scared, the bruises now emotional instead of physical. Then Dexter relapses into a fake heroin addiction, and Rita is suddenly standing at a fork she knows by heart. In Paul's era, she minimized, forgave, waited for the next collapse. With Dexter, she does the opposite. She kicks him out. No yelling, no bargaining, just a quiet line in the sand. You do not bring this into my home. To keep this clear, she is wrong about the substance and right about the pattern. She misdiagnoses the problem as drugs, not a code-driven serial killer, but the central question she's finally asking is accurate. Are you willing to be accountable to this family or not? The methadone ultimatum crystallizes that. Meetings, structure, testing, transparency, consistency, effort. It's naive as an investigation of Dexter's real psychology, but it's powerful as a demand for visible change. And for the first time, Dexter has to improvise emotionally instead of logistically. No kill room. No plastic. Just folding chairs in a church basement, stale coffee, and strangers sharing real trauma while he performs a fake one. He builds a recovery narrative the way he'd build a case file: details, backstory, plausible triggers. We see him attend meetings, talk about urges, craft apologies. On the surface, this is Dexter being supportive. Underneath, it's him learning in real time how to weaponize vulnerability as part of his cover. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what Rita thinks she's controlling and what she's actually reinforcing. She believes she's forcing a choice between addiction and family. In reality, Dexter is choosing between the dark passenger and the domestic shield that lets him keep killing. Every chip he pretends to earn, every share he fakes, is a calculation. How much emotional exposure is required to maintain operational control? Along the way, Rita changes too. Standing her ground with the methadone plan rewires her self-image. She's no longer the woman abuse happens to. She's the mother who can enforce consequences, the partner who can demand better than Paul 2.0. She goes back to work, pushes for more intimacy, expects Dexter to show up for school events and daily routines. Each major section of their relationship after this is marked by her assuming she has the leverage to insist on honesty. But that's the paradox tightening around them. Every boundary Rita successfully sets doesn't just strengthen her, it narrows Dexter's margin for error. A missed meeting, a late night, one slip in the story, and she now has both the confidence and the framework to question him. If this is what she does over a fake heroin habit, what happens when the next crack in his facade looks even darker? That quiet rebellion in the methadone line is not the end of Rita's evolution. It's the moment her growth starts actively threatening Dexter's double life. That quiet rebellion in the methadone line is not just a character beat for Rita. It's the moment Dexter realizes his perfect cover has started thinking for itself. And when his cover starts asking questions, his whole plan needs a redesign. So what does he do? Faced with dopes circling him, the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation tightening, and his own rituals slipping out of control, Dexter reaches for the most conventional upgrade imaginable. A ring. A proposal. Marriage as damage control. To keep this clear, we're watching a man under siege grab the safest story society offers and wrap it around himself like armor. From Dexter's perspective, this is less grand romance and more containment strategy. A wife, a house, kids in the backyard, that tableau creates a narrative shield. Serial killers are drifters, loners, men without roots. Family men host barbecues, coach soccer, show up at school plays. If he can lock in that image, he believes the investigation can't stick, because the psychology of everyone around him will default to not Dexter. He has a family. He even says it in different ways across the season. Rita makes him feel normal, gives him structure. He's not describing love so much as infrastructure, a stabilizing frame for the chaos he can't quite control anymore. The focus is not just on avoiding suspicion, it's on boxing in his own urges with a schedule, shared responsibilities, and the constant presence of witnesses. But inside Rita's world, the same gesture lands like a miracle. This is a woman whose first marriage taught her that men hit, abandon, use, and blame her. Paul turned vows into weapons. Every time she's flinched at Dexter's distance, some part of that trauma script has whispered, "Here we go again." So when Dexter proposes, she doesn't see a containment plan. She sees the ultimate correction. Proof that she is not disposable, not broken, not destined to be the woman left behind. The ring is validation, safety, and a public declaration that this quiet, safe man chooses her in a way Paul never did. How could she possibly imagine that, for him, the commitment is also a tactical maneuver? Watch the proposal scene. Dexter is awkward, stilted, almost mechanical in his delivery, like he's following an internal code of what proposals are supposed to look like. Rita, by contrast, floods with emotion. Tears, laughter, disbelief. The camera leans into her joy, the music swells, the editing sells this as peak romance, while subtextually, we're watching a clinically strategic move masquerading as a love story. When she says yes, a new dynamic clicks into place. Rita doubles down on the fantasy of stability. Dexter doubles down on the performance of normalcy. Each gets exactly what they think they want. But what happens when a marriage is built half on genuine affection and half on operational cover? How long can that structure stand once reality starts leaking in from both sides? Especially when the honeymoon phase collides with Dexter's darkest season yet? That collision arrives with 3 words Rita never expected to say again: "I'm pregnant, Dexter," in a single beat. The safe second chance she's been carefully building snaps back into question. Is this Paul all over again? Another man who will leave her holding the bag while she scrambles to keep the kids afloat? We watch the fear hit first. She thinks about her childhood, about the bruises and court dates with Paul, about raising Astor and Cody in permanent crisis mode. For a moment, you can almost see her plan forming to quietly end the pregnancy, to keep her fragile equilibrium intact. But then she does something crucial for her trajectory. She decides to believe. To believe that this man, who shows up, who listens, who doesn't explode, might actually be the foundation of a different family. That choice isn't naive, it's radical. She's not drifting into motherhood. She's consciously walking back into the fire. And pregnancy flips a switch in her agency. Suddenly, Rita's not just asking Dexter if he can come over for dinner. She's talking mortgage, neighborhoods, school districts, therapy for the kids, emotional stability as a long-term investment. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on baby names, it's on infrastructure. She pushes for a house in the suburbs, for more consistent presence, for a version of Dexter that isn't just the gentle boyfriend, but the reliable husband and father. In doing that, she unintentionally drags his cover story into a far more demanding form of control than he ever planned. Dexter's narration tells us he feels detached from impending fatherhood, almost clinically confused by it. But operationally, he treats the baby as another shield. A pregnant partner makes him look stable to any investigation. A newborn becomes the perfect excuse for exhaustion, late arrivals, erratic behavior. The plan is simple. Blend deeper. Hide in plain sight. Yet every diaper change and prenatal class also compresses his schedule, crowds his nights, and turns each kill into a higher risk maneuver. Fatherhood doesn't neutralize the dark passenger. It forces him into tighter, sloppier windows, where failure is more likely. Once Harrison is born, Rita's priorities hard shift. She's no longer just escaping Paul's shadow. She's constructing a future brick by brick. That makes her sharper, more observant, less willing to wave away Dexter's vanishing acts as harmless quirks. A missed call is no longer an inconvenience, it's a potential threat to 3 children. How long can she keep rationalizing the lies when the stakes are this literal and this small? Visually, the show leans into that fracture. Rita cradling Harrison in a sunlit kitchen, pastel walls and baby toys scattered on the floor. Cut to Dexter slipping out at night, plastic sheeting glinting under fluorescent light as he dismembers another body. Domesticity and horror run on parallel tracks that keep drifting closer until they feel like the same scene shot from different angles. And in the middle of that contrast sits Harrison, not just as emotional leverage, but as a mirror. The central question becomes unavoidable. What is Dexter actually bringing into Rita's life? And what kind of world is he building for this child, who has no choice in any of it? Along the way, every smile at that crib, every bloodstained Dexter washes off his hands, tightens the noose. Because this baby doesn't just raise the stakes. He's the living reminder that Dexter's illusion of control now has an heir, and that inheritance will not stay theoretical for long. The baby raises the stakes. The house pretends to lower them. On paper, this move to the suburbs looks like Rita finally winning her war against chaos, but underneath the fresh paint and manicured lawn, we're watching Dexter construct the most dangerous illusion of control he's ever had. Let's kick things off with Rita's side, because the psychology of this house starts long before a realtor hands over keys. Rita has survived Paul, the cramped apartment, the constant low-level terror that violence could come home at any moment. So when she fixates on a place with a yard for Astor and Cody, a safe neighborhood, good schools, she isn't just house hunting. She's exercising ghosts. Every open house is a test. Will this space finally let her kids ride bikes without flinching at every car that slows down? To keep this clear, the focus is not just on square footage or property values. Rita wants a literal fresh start, something that does not carry Paul's fingerprints or the memories of police at the door. We see it in the way she lights up at the idea of a backyard barbecue, in how she talks about Harrison crawling on real grass instead of apartment carpet. For once, she's not just surviving someone else's damage, she's planning a future she owns. Dexter initially resists. The mortgage, the commute, the logistics, all look like friction against his nightly routine. A bigger house means more questions, more responsibilities, less time to stalk and kill. But then the plan flips in his mind. What better camouflage for a serial killer than the most generic dream on the block? The guy grilling in the backyard, waving to neighbors, carrying a baby monitor, is the last person anyone puts on an investigation board. From there, the domestic montage becomes its own kind of stagecraft. Rita painting walls, obsessing over color swatches, organizing closets, labeling boxes, planning those barbecues with the quiet pride of someone who finally believes danger is behind her. Meanwhile, Dexter installs a shed. On the surface, it's family storage, tools, bikes, holiday decorations. Symbolically, it's an annex for his secret life, a reminder that even here, in the safest zip code, he's budgeting space for the dark passenger. The house amplifies Rita's sense of security. This is not Paul's place, not a rental she can be pushed out of. It's hers, or at least it feels that way, and that ownership turns her into the moral center of this little world. She believes she's built a fortress against the past. Dexter's internal monologue tells a different story. The house is a set, a well-dressed crime scene that must stay spotless while he tracks blood elsewhere. Every freshly mowed lawn is one more layer of denial. Each major section will show how these layers eventually collapse. But here, the central question hangs over every exterior shot: how long can this fade hold? Because that pristine front door Rita locks every night to keep danger out, that's the same door that will one day fail to stop the real monster from walking in, turning her dream home into the final echo of Dexter's original trauma. On the surface, the move is a success. New house, new baby on the way, the framed photos on the wall finally matching the family in Rita's head. But almost immediately, the picture starts to ripple at the edges. It's little things first. Missed calls that go straight to voicemail. Dexter slipping out on urgent cases at odd hours. Coming home with a cut on his cheek or bruised ribs he waves off as work stuff. He forgets date nights, drifts through milestones with that eerie calm. When Rita tells him she's pregnant, his face doesn't light up, it just processes. We feel it with her, a delay where joy should be. To keep this clear, the pattern isn't dramatic at the start. It's cumulative. One late night is nothing. One vague explanation is normal. But when the absences, the injuries, and the emotional flatness all line up, Rita's nervous system recognizes the shape long before her conscious mind does. She's lived this trajectory before. With Paul, the lies were sloppier, but the rhythm was the same. Sudden disappearances, stories that changed on retelling. A man who always had a reason he couldn't be present, couldn't be honest, couldn't be real. That history sharpens her perception now. She hears the hollowness in just another forensics consult. She notices when Dexter can describe a crime scene in detail, but can't remember what Cody said at dinner. At the same time, that history dulls her suspicion. If Paul was the embodiment of danger, Dexter is the plan to escape it. He doesn't hit her. He's gentle with the kids. He brings groceries instead of apologies. Admitting that this man might also be hiding something toxic doesn't just threaten the relationship, it threatens the entire story of her recovery. The central question becomes brutal. If Dexter is wrong, does that mean she still can't trust herself to choose a good man? So the confrontations come out soft, almost apologetic. Quiet, you were gone a long time. Everything okay? When he sneaks back in before dawn. Attentive, you've been distant lately. Is it work? When he zones out during a family barbecue. Dexter answers with half-truths. Yes, it's work. Yes, he's tired. Yes, he's overwhelmed by the baby. All technically plausible, all emotionally hollow, all just convincing enough to let her back away from the edge. But as Rita grows more confident, going back to work, setting firmer boundaries with Paul, she becomes less willing to live in total opacity. She starts asking follow-up questions. Which case? Why didn't you call? If you're so exhausted, why do you seem most awake when you come back from these walks? She doesn't explode. She observes. She files away inconsistencies, like evidence in an investigation she's terrified to finish. In this video, we're going to see how that quiet, internal investigation becomes the real threat to Dexter's control. Because along the way, one more variable enters the frame, someone outside the marriage who sees the same cracks Rita does and says the one thing Dexter never planned for. You're not crazy. Something is wrong. And that's where Elliot walks in. Fresh haircut, good salary, owns a toolbox, and actually knows how to use it. He is the archetypal safe option, dropped 2 doors down from a woman who has spent her entire life calibrating her survival around unsafe men. While Dexter is out chasing blood patterns and perfecting the code, Elliot is literally on the sidewalk, waving to Rita, carrying groceries, being present. In a neighborhood investigation of who is reliably there, Dexter fails the test. Elliot passes without trying. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Elliot as a potential affair, it's on Elliot as a control group. When the washing machine breaks, Dexter disappears, Elliot shows up with parts and time. When Rita vents about Dexter's late nights, Elliot doesn't gaslight her or minimize it. He listens and quietly reflects back that no, she isn't asking for too much. That simple mirroring is huge. After an abusive marriage and years of conditioning herself to accept crumbs, hearing you're not crazy from someone stable rewires Rita's psychology more than Dexter ever understood. Along the way, Elliot becomes her unofficial sounding board. Backyard beers, quick chats in the driveway, the kind of low-stakes intimacy that builds one favor, one confession, one sympathetic look at a time. We watch Rita test phrases she's never dared to say out loud, that Dexter is distant, that his explanations don't always add up, that she feels alone in a house that's supposedly full. Elliot doesn't push, he just doesn't flinch. Compared to Dexter's evasions, that calm acceptance starts to look like safety. So when we get to the almost kiss, it's not really about Elliot's lips on hers, it's about the life behind that moment. A life where if she asks, "Where were you last night?" she might actually get a real answer. A life where she doesn't have to run her own private investigation on the man she sleeps next to. The central question for Rita in that instant isn't, do I want Elliot? It's, do I want to keep living with this constant gnawing doubt? She pulls back. Immediately, guilt hits, survival patterns kick in, and she self-corrects in the only way she knows how. She recommits to the existing plan. She tells Dexter what happened, effectively handing him a choice. Step up, or step out. She is, for once, not passively waiting to be chosen. She is defining the terms of staying. Dexter's response exposes the real collapse. He isn't shattered by the idea of losing her. He's irritated that his cover almost slipped. He performs jealousy, stages his recommitment, tightens the emotional leash just enough to keep Rita anchored. From his perspective, the threat is tactical, not relational. From ours, it's the moment Rita's loyalty becomes conscious, deliberate, no longer the default setting of a traumatized survivor, but a decision she will keep making, until new information rips that decision apart. Elliot doesn't break the marriage. He does something more dangerous to Dexter's illusion of control. He proves Rita has options. And once a character realizes they have options in this story, the trajectory is already bending toward rupture. Elliot proves Rita has options. The universe answers with something darker, proof that Dexter has options too. Options she was never invited to know about. Let's kick things off with the spark. It's not a big cinematic reveal. It's the kind of boring detail you only notice when you're already on edge. A strange charge on a joint credit card. Gas or a motel in a part of town Dexter never mentions. A call that drops the second she walks into the room. The time gaps between late night at the lab and when he actually comes through the door. On their own, explainable, stacked together, they become an investigation Rita can't ignore. In this video, we're going to treat that moment as a pivot in Rita's psychology. Because when she quietly copies down an address from a bill or follows the GPS history in his car, she's doing something huge for her character. She's breaking the rule that kept her safe from Paul. Don't ask. Don't push. Don't make him angry. Now, she's pushing. The door to the apartment or motel room clicks open, and the air feels wrong. Too still. Too private. A toothbrush that isn't hers. Clothes that don't match the life she sees at home. Maybe a second phone, a different cologne, a drawer with neatly folded shirts that smell like Dexter but exist outside their shared space. To keep this clear, what she's walking into is not evidence of a serial killer. It's evidence of a second Dexter. She doesn't leap to Trinity-level horror. Why would she? The frame she has is Paul. Lies, drugs, secrets, violence that started small and escalated. So the central question in her mind isn't who is Dexter really? It's how far back does this betrayal go? Is this about another woman? Is this about addiction? Is this about him choosing any life but the one with her? When she confronts him, the plan Dexter runs is classic controlled damage. We watch the double life compress into a single, carefully curated confession. Stress at work, pressure from forensics, feeling overwhelmed by the kids, by marriage, by the expectations of being the reliable one. He admits just enough failure to seem honest, but not enough to collapse the illusion. No affairs, no violence, just a man who needed space and was too ashamed to ask. Rita hears the gaps. We can see it. Her face cycles through anger, fear, recognition. She knows this pattern. Lie, discovery, partial truth, emotional reset. But the focus is not just on whether she believes him. It's on what believing the full alternative would cost. If she calls this what it feels like, a fundamental breach, then she risks detonating the family she built out of the wreckage Paul left behind. So she makes a heartbreaking compromise. She accepts the partial truth, labels it a rough patch, lets survival mode masquerade as forgiveness. Along the way, she has literally stepped into Dexter's second life, touched the edges of his constructed control, and then walked back out. Alive, still in the dark. The tragedy is that the next monster in Dexter's orbit won't let her walk back out at all. And here's the cruel twist. The woman Dexter picked, because she wouldn't look too closely becomes the one pair of eyes he can't stand to disappoint. Let's kick things off with Dexter's voiceover. In Season 1, his internal narration is almost purely mechanical. The code, the ritual, the plan. Harry taught me, Harry says, the code demands. Family is camouflage, not motivation. But by the time we reach Season 3 and 4, there's a pivot. He starts justifying restraint with a different language. I have a family now. He weighs a potential kill against Astor's recital, Cody's game, Rita's trust. The focus is not just on whether a target fits the code, but whether the risk might blow up the life he's built with them. That shift is psychological. Harry is a set of rules. Rita is a living gaze. We watch Dexter rehearse her reaction in his head, almost like a second investigation running parallel to the kill. If she saw this blood, if she heard this lie, if she knew where I really was tonight, what would collapse first? The marriage, the kids' safety, or the fragile sense that he could ever be good for them? There are moments where Harry's ghost urges one course of action, but Dexter backs off anyway because he imagines Rita's fear more vividly than Harry's disappointment. To keep this clear, Rita is not giving TED Talks on justice. She's doing something scarier for Dexter. She keeps stating simple, non-negotiable values: honesty, safety for the kids, emotional presence. When she pushes back about his late nights, when she lays out that she cannot have another Paul in her house, she's drawing a moral baseline that has nothing to do with serial killer ethics and everything to do with basic decency. Dexter knows, narratively and emotionally, that he is violating that baseline every time he chooses a kill over a school event or lies about his whereabouts. And when we do see genuine guilt from him, it's almost never about a body on a table. It's about Rita. The methadone lie in Season 2. The way his secret life drags Paul back into their orbit. The night he misses their honeymoon departure because he's cleaning up a murder. These are the failures that haunt him, not the victims on his slides. The central question for him quietly becomes, am I failing them more than I'm satisfying the code? That's the paradox. Rita has no idea she's functioning as Dexter's conscience. She thinks she's just asking for a safe home and a present partner. Yet her existence is the only thing that makes him even flirt with the idea of being better, of quitting, of changing his trajectory. Along the way, every time he chooses the dark passenger over dinner at home, that fragile conscience erodes. Which is why, when this moral center is finally removed, Dexter doesn't just lose a wife. He loses the last internal brake on his darkness, setting up a new phase of his life, where the consequences of that loss will hit everyone in his orbit even harder. That new phase doesn't begin with a murder scene. It starts with a minivan. Rita packs snacks, sunscreen, and this fragile optimism that a family road trip will reset everything. No Paul, no court dates, no Miami crime scenes bleeding into bedtime, just a getaway where she can rewrite her story, not as a survivor clinging to stability, but as a wife and mother actively building new memories. For Rita, the plan is simple. Distance plus time together equals healing. For Dexter, the same plan is a trap. No night escapes. No convenient late at the lab excuses. No solo drives where the dark passenger can clock in. Just continuous observation from the one person whose gaze is getting sharper. The central question on this trip isn't where they're going. It's whether Dexter's mask can survive close quarters, 24/7 contact. Let's kick things off with the psychology of that car. Rita sees a moving cocoon. Dexter sees a mobile cage. Every missed exit, every wrong turn, every "are we there yet?" from the back seat isn't just normal family stress. It's a reminder that his control is conditional. He can't slip away to investigate a lead. He can't track a target. He can't even check something suspicious without explaining why he's suddenly so interested in a random news alert. The friction starts small. Dexter is distracted, mentally running logistics instead of playing road trip games. Rita tries to get him to sing along with the kids, to talk about the future, to imagine more trips like this. He gives polite half smiles, non-answers, that familiar emotional static. The kids feel it before they can articulate it. Cody gets quieter. Astor gets sharper, rolling her eyes when Dexter zones out. This is just standard vacation tension on the surface. But when one partner is hiding bodies and blood slides, every sigh, every silence carries extra weight. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the arguments they do have, but on the ones they almost have. A moment where Rita finally says, in one form or another, be here, with us. It's not a dramatic confrontation. It's a plea. Put the phone down. Look at your son. Talk to your daughter. Share something real. And that turns out to be the hardest request Dexter ever gets. Because it isn't about a cover story he can fabricate. It's about presence he doesn't know how to manufacture. The trip doesn't explode. It deflates. They come home with photos, souvenirs, and a subtle recalibration. Rita files away new data about Dexter's limits. His distance, his impatience, that invisible wall he never quite steps through. Dexter files away something too. Vacations are not escapes. They are logistical nightmares for a double life. Pressure cookers where his code, his routines, and his family fantasy grind against each other. And if he can barely hold the mask together on a road trip, what happens when a killer like Trinity starts pressing on every weak point at once? When the investigation follows him home, into the kitchen, into the bathtub, that's the next destination on this trajectory, and there are no scenic detours left. So when Trinity steps into the narrative, he doesn't just raise the stakes for Dexter as a hunter. He walks straight into the heart of Dexter's family fantasy and shows us the nightmare version hiding underneath. A church elder, a charity builder, a man who sings hymns on Sunday and quietly erases his wife and children the rest of the week. Let's kick things off with that image. Arthur Mitchell at the head of a breakfast table, leading Grace. On the surface, he's what Dexter tells himself he's aiming for by season 4. A stable routine, a normal house, a loyal spouse, kids who think dad is just tired from work. But as the investigation peels back the layers, we see the truth. The trembling son. The daughter trapped and surveilled. The wife living in permanent, flinching terror. The focus is not just on Trinity as Dexter's white whale, the one killer he can't immediately decode. Trinity is a dark, funhouse mirror of suburban control. He's what happens when the same plan Dexter is running, double life, rigid rituals, family as camouflage, plays out for 30 years instead of 3. And the consequences are catastrophic. While Dexter shadows Arthur, Rita is back in the new house, repainting walls, nursing Harrison, trying to stabilize a life that keeps slipping out from under her. Dexter's obsession means more late nights, more unexplained injuries, more phone calls that drop at the sound of her voice. We watch him crash the car and spin a cover story. We watch Rita clock the cuts, the fatigue, the distance. This is work-life balance, learned from a family annihilator. To keep this clear, the show quietly lines up 2 households for comparison. On one side, Rita, the woman who already survived Paul's violence, who rebuilt herself enough to say no, to set boundaries, to choose what looked like a safe man. On the other, Arthur's wife, who never escaped, who lives in the version of Rita's past that never ended. How long before one starts to resemble the other? The psychology here is brutal. Dexter looks at Trinity and doesn't just see a monster to stop. He sees a proof of concept. A serial killer who kept the code hidden, who raised kids, who built a life around the murders instead of in spite of them. If Arthur can do it, why can't Dexter perfect the same design? In this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between intention and outcome, because this is where Dexter's delusion hardens. He doubles down on the idea that he can have both, Rita's love and his nightly hunts, and every hour he spends tracking Arthur is a bet that those worlds will never collide. But they're already on a collision course. Trinity doesn't know Rita exists yet. He doesn't know about Harrison, or the bathtub, or the echo of another boy left screaming in blood. When he does, Dexter's fantasy of control will meet the one variable he never accounted for, a killer who walks straight through the front door of the life Dexter thought he was protecting. And while Trinity is walking toward that front door, Rita is quietly doing something far more dangerous to Dexter's illusion of control. She's outgrowing the role he picked for her. By the Trinity season, Rita isn't just the gentle, damaged cover story Dexter chose. She's in therapy, or at least in structured self-help, finally putting language to the patterns that used to run her. She names Paul as an abuser, not a mistake. She talks about why safe men feel comforting and why disappearing into their orbit feels like survival. To keep this clear, she's not just venting, she's building a framework, a personal code for what she will and will not live through again. From that framework come concrete moves. She takes point on the new house, weighing mortgages, pushing through inspections, deciding what's best for Astor and Cody without waiting for Dexter to bless every step. She worries about college funds, she chases contractors, she starts managing finances with a confidence that would have been unthinkable back when Paul controlled everything. This is what independence looks like in practice. Not a speech, but a stack of signed papers with Rita's name on them. And she brings that same clarity into her conversations with Dexter. She asks for honesty about his late nights. She asks for time together that isn't just family chaos, and for shared responsibility when he disappears into work. These aren't desperate, pleading ultimatums. They land as calm, adult expectations. If we're building a life, I need you in it. When she confronts him about the methadone lie, we can feel the shift. She doesn't crumble. She holds the line, articulating that secrets are not acceptable, that she won't repeat the blind trust that kept her trapped with Paul. Along the way, she's also building a life that doesn't revolve entirely around Dexter's availability. Neighborhood friendships, school events where she's the point parent, a sense of herself as a survivor, a mother, a woman who can host a barbecue, negotiate with a mechanic, and comfort another mom dealing with her own failing marriage. The focus is not just on being Mrs. Morgan, it's on Rita finally seeing herself as more than a victim or a prop in someone else's plan. Here's the bitter irony. The healthier Rita becomes, the more obvious Dexter's evasions look. Every canceled date, every vague explanation, every hollow promise of later now hits a woman trained by therapy to notice patterns. His mask doesn't get easier to wear, it starts to crack under the quiet pressure of her growth. How long before she follows that instinct all the way to an investigation of her own? The central question hanging over these episodes is brutal. What would Rita have done if she'd had just a little more time? Because, in the Trinity season, her trajectory is finally pointed toward the life she always had the potential to build. Independent, self-aware, unwilling to live in someone else's shadow. And that is exactly when she walks, unknowingly, into the path of the one killer Dexter can't anticipate, can't redirect, and ultimately can't stop. Rita is moving toward freedom at the exact moment Dexter walks her into the crosshairs. To see how inevitable that bathtub becomes, we have to track every missed exit on the Trinity Highway and ask, at what point did Dexter actually choose the hunt over his own family? Let's kick things off with the first clear fork. Dexter figures out Arthur targets families. He knows this isn't just a guy who kills strangers in alleys. This is a ritual built around mothers, fathers, children. The central question, right there, should have been, how do I get Rita, Astor, Cody, and Harrison as far away as possible? Instead, he makes a different plan. He keeps stalking Trinity alone, keeps the investigation private, and never even floats the idea of relocating or warning them. Control, in Dexter's mind, means secrecy, not shared safety. From there, the red flags start stacking. We watch Arthur's volatility explode in public, smashing walls at the build site, terrorizing his own family, nearly attacking a boy in broad daylight. Dexter sees this unstable psychology up close and still treats him like a puzzle to crack, not a live grenade rolling closer to Miami. Arthur gets spooked. Arthur gets suspicious. Arthur gets on a plane. Each major section will escalate the risk, but Dexter's response never upgrades from "I've got this." To keep this clear, look at the moments where the show lets us into Dexter's head. He thinks about Rita's smile when he imagines a world where Trinity is gone. He pictures Harrison safe in a future where the code has once again neutralized the threat. And every time he rationalizes, the danger is contained, Arthur doesn't know who I am, my control is enough. Those inner monologues are not just character beats, they are documented instances of self-deception, where the fantasy of the perfect kill overrides the obvious consequences. Then we hit the table. Dexter finally has Trinity wrapped, taped, scalpel ready. This is the moment for efficiency. Quick incision, clean kill, no speeches. Instead, he indulges. He taunts Arthur, toys with him, demands emotional closure. That slow, theatrical execution plan hands Trinity exactly what he needs: time. Time to probe, to notice the slip, to hear Dexter's real name. The scene that should have ended the season becomes the hinge where the whole trajectory collapses. Even after Arthur escapes with Dexter's identity, the focus is not just on stopping him. Dexter still frames the threat as personal. He assumes the blowback is aimed at him, not the people Trinity now knows he loves. He sends Rita on vacation, but he doesn't reset his entire life around the fact that a family annihilator has his address. So when Dexter races home in the finale, he isn't just late. He's arriving at the logical endpoint of every selfish choice he made all season. And the worst part? We already know what kind of scene is waiting when a killer like Trinity reaches the house first. So when Dexter steps through that front door, we're not just waiting for a reveal. We're watching a verdict. The phone is ringing, that mundane, domestic sound he's been using as a shield for 4 seasons. He follows it through the house, still half in mission accomplished mode from killing Trinity. Then he hears the real sound that matters. Harrison crying. White tile. Echoing wails. A bathroom that should be neutral space. To keep this clear, the sequence is brutally simple. Dexter pushes open the door, sees the baby on the floor, and then the frame widens. Harrison is sitting in a slick pool of blood, screaming, while Rita's body lies pale and motionless in the bathtub, wrists cut, water turned red. No music swell, no monologue, just the image. In this video, we're going to treat that image as the fulcrum of the entire series, because the show is doing something incredibly precise here. From a baby in blood-soaked flooring, to a mother's body drifting in a red bath, to a father frozen in the doorway, the scene collapses time. Harrison's tableau is a direct visual echo of Dexter's own origin, the night Harry found him. The central question hits us immediately. Has Dexter escaped his trauma, or just replicated it? By putting Rita in the role of Harry's wife, the series completes a horrific generational loop. Harry walked into a shipping container and found a child screaming in his mother's blood. Decades later, Dexter walks into a bathroom and finds the same pattern, now with him as the absent protector whose plan failed. This is the Code's endgame. Not justice, not control, just repetition. Now pause and reverse the camera. What did Rita experience in her final hours? She's packing for a trip, believing her marriage is messy, but fundamentally safe. She trusts Dexter's investigation skills, his calm, his promise that Trinity is contained. She doesn't know there's a serial killer with her address. She doesn't know her husband's double life is the magnet that pulled Arthur Mitchell into their orbit. Imagine realizing, in your last terrified moments, that the danger in your bathroom is a man you've never met, punishing you for a life you never even knew your partner lived. For Dexter, the shock is almost anti-dramatic. He doesn't scream, he doesn't collapse, he goes quiet. Numb, we watch the dawning realization that compartmentalization was a lie. His darkness didn't stay in the kill room. It came home, climbed the stairs, and chose the person he never meant to hurt. What does the Code mean if the most innocent blood in the story is on his hands? That's why Rita's death lands differently than any of Dexter's victims. She isn't a target, a rival, or a necessary casualty. She's the one person whose suffering he never rationalized in advance, the one moral center whose absence tears the fantasy away. Along the way, every season has hinted that this trajectory was inevitable. Here, the consequences finally crystallize. And Rita's story doesn't end in that bathtub. It detonates forward, rewriting Dexter's psychology, stamping itself onto Harrison's origin, and permanently darkening the moral universe of the show. The next sections will track how that single crimson image keeps echoing long after the water drains. So, when we cut back in time to Rita pregnant and Dexter painting a nursery, that bathtub image is still waiting for us in the future. A serial killer and a domestic abuse survivor stand over a crib, talking about hope. That's the paradox. The same tableau that should scream danger instead sells both of them the lie of a clean slate. From sonograms to Lamazi classes to Harrison's first cries, the show leans into domestic ritual. Baby showers, tiny clothes, mortgage paperwork. On the surface, it looks like a plan for normalcy finally taking shape. Underneath, Dexter is doing a different calculation. Can the Code coexist with diapers and midnight feedings, or is this the thing that finally breaks his illusion of control? To keep this clear, Rita reads every sign through her own history. She remembers Paul drunk, violent, demanding. Next to that, Dexter's awkwardness during the pregnancy looks harmless, even sweet. He's distant? That must be nervous new dad energy. He misses appointments? Work must be intense. The central question for her isn't what is he hiding? It's, have I finally picked a man who won't hurt us? Dexter, meanwhile, is terrified for completely different reasons. He's not afraid he'll be a bad father emotionally. He's afraid fatherhood will interfere with his ritual. Where do you stash blood slides in a baby-proofed house? How do you stalk a target when you're timing feedings and daycare drop-offs? Each practical detail becomes an existential threat to the Code. Rita's psychology pushes her to overcorrect. After surviving Paul, she clings to the fantasy of the stable nuclear family with almost religious intensity. Another broken home is unthinkable. So when Dexter disappears on late-night work calls, when he's unreachable during a false labor scare, when he comes back rumpled and exhausted, she chooses the most generous interpretation every time. Isn't this what grown-up relationships look like? Busy, stressed, but committed? Along the way, Dexter quietly pivots. Rita and the baby stop being just cover. They become anchor. He convinces himself that being a better partner and father is part of the mission, not a contradiction to the kill room. That self-deception is subtle but lethal. If family life is proof he's managing everything, then every successful night home with Harrison becomes evidence that the plan is working, even as his procedures get sloppier. We also see Rita grow in this phase. She takes initiative with the house, makes financial decisions, sets routines that structure their days. She's not the fragile, apologetic woman from season 1. She's running the home front. Dexter misreads that domestic leadership as proof she's content and safely distracted. In reality, it's her reclaiming control, building a life she refuses to lose. There are near-miss moments everywhere. Missed calls when Dexter is out hunting, unexplained absences during contractions, little lies about rehab, stakeouts, late shifts. Each one is a potential crack in the fade, and each time, Rita spackles over it with hope, which is what makes the trajectory so ominous. The more she invests in this fresh start, the more catastrophic it will be when Dexter's world finally bleeds into hers. Because now, there isn't just a marriage tied to the illusion. There's a baby strapped into it, buckled into the front row for the collapse. And then, Dexter does the most dangerous thing he's ever done for Rita's sake. He gives her a house. Fresh paint, neutral walls, a good school district cul-de-sac. On the surface, it's the reward for surviving Paul, for enduring chaos, and finally earning stability. But if we slow the camera down, every brushstroke is part of a crime scene in progress. The mortgage, the HOA rules, the manicured lawn, they're not just middle-class milestones. They're camouflage for a life built on blood. To keep this clear, Dexter's plan here is elegant in theory. Suburbia becomes his new kill room without plastic. The commute, the errands, the late-night work emergencies all fold perfectly into a story no neighbor will question. Who interrogates the dad hauling trash cans, or the husband running to the hardware store again? The focus is not just on what Dexter does in the shadows, but how flawlessly the environment writes his alibis for him. For Rita, though, this house is not a mask. It's an answer. She grew up in instability, survived Paul's violence, and internalized the belief that chaos is what love looks like. Dexter signing a 30-year mortgage reads like the opposite of that trauma. In her psychology, this isn't just square footage. It's proof he is the anti-Paul, responsible, predictable, invested in a future that doesn't end with a police report. We watch her blossom into that belief. She manages 3 kids' schedules, negotiates with neighbors, pushes back on the hoe when they overstep. She goes back to work, sets boundaries, starts talking about college funds instead of survival. Rita stops sounding like someone grateful for scraps and starts sounding like a partner with expectations. Isn't that what we wanted for her? Meanwhile, Dexter's control starts to fray in the very environment designed to protect him. Bedtime stories versus blood slides, school plays versus stalking patterns. A barbecue with the neighbors scheduled the same night a target finally surfaces. Each new piece of normal Rita builds around him, multiplies the variables in his plan. The trajectory looks wholesome from the outside. From Dexter's side, it's a tightening noose made of taw calendars, and in that noise, Rita's instincts flicker. The distracted look when Dexter is mentally cataloging a crime scene, the odd hours, the emotional unavailability that doesn't quite match the devoted family man he's performing. She sees the late nights, the methadone lie, the missed calls. She feels something off. But between Harrison's feedings, Astor's mood swings, Cody's homework, and a roof that suddenly needs fixing, those signals get drowned out. In this video, we're going to keep asking the central question. In a neighborhood engineered to hide dysfunction behind white picket fences, is Rita finally safe here? Or has Dexter just upgraded his mask to one no one will ever question until it's far too late. Because, as we'll see, the first real crack in this picture-perfect fade doesn't appear in a dark alley. It shows up right there in the dream house. When the blood finally catches up to the wallpaper's barely dry on that dream house before Dexter brings in something far more corrosive than blood. Miguel Prado. From Rita's perspective, this looks like progress. Healthy, normal, real adult friendship at last. Let's kick things off from her vantage point, not his. She sees a charismatic, high-powered assistant to taking an interest in her fiancé, inviting him into a world of professional respect and social capital. The focus is not just on Miguel's charm, it's on what his presence seems to confirm about Dexter. If a man like that wants Dexter as a best man and confidant, then Dexter must be one of the good ones, right? Meanwhile, in the shadows of that same season, Dexter is running an experiment. Miguel isn't just a buddy, he's a live fire test of what happens when the code collides with intimacy. Dexter walks Miguel through stalking, selection, justification. He shares pieces of his psychology he has never voiced to Rita. From our side of the investigation, this is Dexter Beta testing a new plan. What if someone actually knew him and didn't run? Rita, at the same time, is building something very different. She's pregnant, planning a wedding, and, crucially, getting more assertive. She pushes Dexter to talk about money, about combining households, about what kind of father he plans to be. She's not the fragile survivor of season 1 anymore. She's drafting expectations, drawing boundaries, trying to bring their life under mutual control. The central question for her is simple. Can this marriage be honest in all the places her first one was a lie? Dexter answers with partial truths and convenient deflections. When he misses wedding tasks or drifts through conversations, Miguel becomes the perfect scapegoat. Late-night casework, urgent trial prep, the who just won't let him go. We watch a failure montage in miniature. Dexter racing from a kill room to a cake tasting. From coaching Miguel through murder to nodding through registry decisions. 2 lives. 1 collapsing attention span. The irony is brutal. Rita once lived with a man whose criminality was overt, loud, impossible to ignore. Now she lives with a man whose closest friend is literally learning to kill from him, and she files it under normal work stress. She hears tension in Dexter's voice, sees exhaustion in his face, and reads it as the cost of being a good provider. Yet, she doesn't fully disappear into denial. Along the way, we see small acts of self-advocacy, insisting they talk about Paul's kids and Harrison as one family, questioning Dexter's secretive finances, asking why he shuts down when she reaches for deeper intimacy. To keep this clear, Dexter doesn't meet those questions with genuine confession. He offers just enough surface-level vulnerability. I'm overwhelmed. I'm afraid I'll fail you. To satisfy her need for emotional reciprocity without surrendering any real control. As Miguel spirals out of Dexter's grasp, that rehearsal for shared darkness blows up. The apprentice becomes a liability. The plan mutates into another cleanup job. And right as Dexter prepares to erase his own experiment, Rita is standing in a dress shop, on the phone with her fiancé, about to choose commitment over caution. The wedding is coming, and with it, a legal, emotional, and moral bond that will make walking away exponentially harder, just as Dexter's world starts to tilt toward its next, far bloodier collapse. The dress, the vows, the kids scattering petals down the aisle. On the surface, it's the safest image in the world. But this wedding is a paradox. Rita is finally getting the fairy tale moment Paul stole from her, while Dexter is walking into a church to formalize a lie in front of every person who would die to protect her. From Rita's perspective, the ceremony is the culmination of a long, brutal investigation into what safety even looks like. She has the community support she never had as a terrified young wife, Astor and Cody are not props but participants, and the man waiting at the end of the aisle appears gentle, steady, and endlessly patient. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the white dress. It's on a survivor rebuilding her identity in public, with witnesses. After seasons of being defined by what Paul did to her, she is now defining herself by what she is choosing. Inside that same moment, Dexter's psychology is doing something very different. As he listens to vows about honesty and protection, his internal monologue reframes them as a kind of upgraded code: if he promises hard enough, if he feels enough. Maybe that cancels out the blood slides hidden in his air conditioner and the bodies wrapped in plastic. He convinces himself that his love for Rita is real enough to override the structural lie of his life. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between intention and outcome, because this is Dexter's favorite plan. Believe the feeling, ignore the evidence. And yet, even on the wedding day, the red flags are there, fluttering at the edge of the frame. Dexter is distracted, haunted by Miguel's disappearance and the quiet knowledge that he turned his best man into another cleanup job. He ducks phone calls, disappears for errands, offers Rita half-truths about stress and work. Why doesn't she press harder? Why doesn't she treat this like the investigation it should be? Because marriage, for Rita, is not just romance. It's a binding contract that finally promises stability, shared finances, shared home, a shared child on the way. Once she signs that license, any future suspicion of Dexter will feel like a betrayal, not only of him, but of her own judgment. Each major section will show how that legal and psychological lock-in turns later doubts into crises of identity. If Dexter is dangerous, then she was wrong about everything. At the same time, Rita has grown. She is no longer the trembling woman from season 1, apologizing for existing. She goes back to work, sets boundaries with Paul, tells Dexter what she expects from a partner and a father. She believes she deserves this happiness now. That growth raises the stakes of his deception, because he isn't just lying to a fragile victim, he's undermining a hard-won self. So when the officiant pronounces them husband and wife, it does more than bless a union. It upgrades Dexter's mask from boyfriend to husband and father, embedding him deeper into the very life he will eventually destroy. Along the way, that upgraded role will make every slip, every loss of control, not just painful, but lethal for Rita, turning this perfect wedding photo into the first frame of a tragedy we can already feel closing in. Once the vows fade and the rice is swept away, the real investigation begins, not with blood spatter or a crime scene, but with bank statements, mortgage documents, and that slow, sick feeling when numbers don't match stories. Rita walks into marriage with Dexter carrying a private promise: never again. Never again will money be a weapon the way it was with Paul, who used every paycheck and every overdue bill to keep her scared, off balance, and dependent. So when the honeymoon glow wears off and she starts bumping into hidden debts, secret accounts, and evasive answers, this isn't just about dollars. It's about control. Let's kick things off with the apartment and the credit cards. On the surface, it's mundane. A confusing statement here, a card Rita didn't know existed there. But in a life defined by past abuse, those little inconsistencies are alarms. Why is Dexter paying for a separate place? Why is there a balance she never heard about? Why, after a wedding that promised unity, does the money still feel divided and shadowy? To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the logistics of the lie, but on Rita's psychology in this season of her trajectory. Earlier, Rita would have swallowed her anxiety, assumed she was overreacting, and apologized for even asking. Now, she calls a meeting at the kitchen table. Kids, in the other room, papers in front of her, and when Dexter tries to brush it off, she does something we haven't really seen before. She holds the line. Her tone is calm, controlled. She doesn't scream or spiral. She cross-examines. What is this charge? Why didn't you tell me about the apartment? How many cards do you actually have? Each question is a refusal to be gaslit back into passivity. A direct answer to the years when Paul convinced her that her suspicions were the problem, not his behavior. Under that pressure, Dexter improvises. He can't expose the kill rooms, the stalking, the code, so he reaches for half-truths, work stress, needing space, a temporary financial plan that just got away from him. It's damage control in real time. But every rushed cover story creates new inconsistencies, new gaps in the narrative that Rita, now more grounded and less afraid, can actually see. This is a quiet operational failure for Dexter. The mask that once ran on autopilot now requires active maintenance. And he's slipping. Rita's response marks a turning point. She doesn't only say, "I'm hurt." She lays out conditions, full transparency on accounts, shared decision-making on big expenses, no more surprises. And beneath that, an unspoken consequence. If this pattern repeats, she will leave. That is a moral spine hardening in real time. For Dexter, the central question here isn't just, can I keep my secret? It's, can I keep Rita without losing control? He's genuinely rattled by the idea of losing his wife and this constructed family fantasy. But instead of choosing honesty, he doubles down on strategic vulnerability, offering just enough confession about stress and fear to pull on her empathy while keeping the real darkness sealed off. Along the way, he teaches Rita something he doesn't intend, that he is capable of sustained deception. They agree to move forward. On paper, the crisis is resolved. But the trust ledger is no longer blank, and the next time Dexter's story doesn't add up, Rita won't be starting from zero. She'll be measuring it against a documented history of lies, ready for a confrontation that will cut far deeper than credit limits and rent checks. That documented history of lies doesn't stay abstract for long, because then the baby comes. Harrison arrives, and with him, the one thing Dexter's life has never tolerated: chaos at all hours. Let's kick things off with the sensory overload. The house that used to be quiet enough for bloodslide cataloging is suddenly filled with shrill cries at 2 a.m. The soft whir of the baby monitor on the nightstand, the rustle of diapers, the half-finished bottles on the coffee table. Sleep is no longer a controlled variable. It's a scarce resource. Dexter's entire plan has always depended on routine. Now, routine is whatever Harrison decides it is. For Rita, though, this is exactly what she signed up for. She wants Dexter present, engaged, awake in the night with her. After Paul's neglect and violence, the central question in her psychology is simple. Will this man show up when it's hard? So at first, she gives him grace. He's awkward with the baby. He fumbles with swaddles. He looks exhausted. She reads that as new dad nerves, not moral failure. To keep this clear, the baby monitor becomes our key prop. Rita uses it literally, listening for every whimper, ready to protect her child from a world that has already hurt her once. Dexter uses it as a kind of auditory alibi. If the monitor is on, if the house is dark, if his keys are on the counter, then of course he was here all night, even when he wasn't. We watch specific nights where the mask slips. A cry goes unanswered because Dexter is out in the car scouting a target. Rita wakes, hears silence from his side of the bed, and finds only the imprint of his body on the sheets. Another night, he volunteers for a late drive to soothe Harrison, then uses the empty streets as cover for a kill. How many times can that happen before a pattern appears? Rita doesn't have an investigation board on the wall, but she has intuition. missed cries, showers at strange hours, vague explanations about work, about stress, about needing air. The focus is not just on what Dexter does, but on how consistently his absences line up with the moments fatherhood demands presence. Eventually, it stops being about logistics and becomes about emotion. There's a moment where Rita, holding Harrison, tells Dexter he feels distant, like he's somewhere else even when he's in the room. Underneath that is her own childhood, her terror that she's recreating a house where the man of the home is physically there, but emotionally unreachable. Is she marrying another ghost? Along the way, Dexter's internal narration doubles down on the code. He convinces himself that providing a paycheck, a crib, and a monster-free perimeter is enough. If he keeps the dark passenger away from them, isn't that the ultimate act of love? But every time he chooses a kill room over a feeding, every time Rita wakes alone, that rationalization erodes her trust and nudges their trajectory toward collapse. And the ominous part is that these are small failures. A missed diaper, a cold response, an empty space in the bed. Yet each one trains Rita to ask a dangerous question. If he can disappear on his own child, what else is he disappearing into when the monitor goes quiet and the car is gone? The next time his absence has consequences, she won't be able to write it off as exhaustion. Those absences don't just land on Rita. They land on 3 developing nervous systems that have no language for serial killer double life, only for something is wrong with Mom's new husband. From this point on, the investigation into Dexter's collapse quietly moves into the children's eyes. Let's kick things off with the basic setup. Astor is edging into her preteen years, right at that volatile intersection of moral absolutism and emotional hypersensitivity. Cody is younger, softer on the surface, but watchful. Harrison is a baby, absorbing tone and tension long before words. 3 different developmental lenses, one household dynamic that keeps glitching every time Dexter's plan to be a normal family man collides with his code. Astor feels it first, and she feels it loud. The missed school events, the broken promises about camping, movie nights, just being there. On paper, it looks like generic tween attitude. In practice, it's targeted. She doesn't explode at random. She locks on to Dexter's inconsistencies, the way he can be playful one moment and emotionally vacant the next. When she calls him out for not showing up, she's not only angry at the event he missed, she's angry at the gap between his words and his follow-through. That's the central question she keeps pushing. If you care, why aren't you here? Cody moves in the opposite direction. He doesn't lash out. He recedes. There's this quiet mirroring that's chilling if we pay attention. Dexter's emotional detachment becomes a template, and Cody starts withdrawing into himself, watching rather than engaging. No big confrontations, no dramatic scenes, just a kid learning that the safest response to inconsistency is to shut down. In a healthier family, that would be a flashing red light. Here, it's almost invisible, and that invisibility is its own kind of failure. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on their reactions, but on how Rita manages them. Over and over, she steps in as Dexter's defense attorney. He's working. He's stressed. You misunderstood. Every explanation is plausible in isolation. As a pattern, it's denial. Because if she admits that Astor's anger and Cody's silence are accurate readings of the situation, then she has to confront her own misjudgment about the safe man she chose after Paul. This is where Rita's identity splits. She is a protector of her children and a guardian of the family unit, and those roles start to collide. When Astor pushes, Rita smooths it over instead of interrogating it. Is she calming her daughter, or protecting her own need to believe the plan for this new life is still under control? Dexter, meanwhile, is visibly uncomfortable when Astor challenges him. He's used to manipulating adults with rehearsed stories and surface-level charm. A preteen girl with hurt feelings and no interest in his cover narrative is a different kind of problem. You can't stalk, bind, and plastic wrap your way out of a child's accusation. Along the way, each flare-up from Astor and each retreat from Cody pushes Rita closer to a crossroads. How long can she keep defending Dexter's image when her children are living the consequences? The next time their reactions spike, she won't just be smoothing over attitude. She'll be choosing a side. That crossroads doesn't arrive in some abstract argument at home. It shows up in the most ordinary place possible. A family trip Rita believes will finally reset their trajectory. Rita books the beach weekend like it's a lifeline. Sand, sunscreen, a cheap rental with peeling paint, and bunk beds for the kids. On paper, it's nothing. Psychologically, it's everything. For her, this isn't just a vacation. It's proof that she didn't repeat the Paul mistake. Proof that her children are getting the stable, sun-drenched childhood she never had. To keep this clear, we have to hold two plans in our head at once. Rita's plan is simple. Uninterrupted family time. No crises, no late-night calls. Dexter's plan, running in parallel, is a hunt. He's tracking a target, juggling kill room logistics, watching the clock like a man, running two investigations at once. The trip isn't a priority. It's an obstacle. We watch the gap open immediately. A last-minute work emergency that delays their departure. Dexter's eyes drifting to his phone while Cody tries to show him a sandcastle. An unexplained drive into town that is, in reality, a reconnaissance run. Earlier in the series, Rita would have swallowed that with a nervous smile, told herself this is what dating a blood spatter analyst looks like. Now, the same behavior lands like a quiet betrayal. Along the way, the failures stack. Dinner reservations missed because Dexter got turned around. A promised kayak outing that never happens because he disappears for an hour that feels like 3. The kids clock it. Astor's sarcasm sharpens, Cody's silence deepens, and Rita, standing there with a towel over her shoulder, realizes she's not just covering for Dexter anymore. She's auditioning for a role she swore she'd never play again. The central question finally explodes in a confrontation back at the rental, after Dexter returns with another flimsy excuse and salt spray still drying on everyone's skin. She doesn't scream about the one missed activity. She names the pattern. The birthdays, the recitals, the nights he had to work. She can't name the code or the dark passenger, but she can name the feeling. He keeps choosing something else over them. What kind of man needs to escape his own family vacation? Dexter's response is textbook damage control. Apologies. A promise of a do-over trip. Small, affectionate gestures, rubbing her shoulders, helping clean up, overcompensating with the kids. But for the first time, Rita's face doesn't soften. The emotional return on those gestures is collapsing. The illusion of control he's maintained over this part of his life is slipping, and they both sense it. In the framed photo they take on the last day, everyone is technically smiling. Dexter holding Harrison, Rita tucked against his side, the older kids squinting into the sun. On the surface, it's the picture of success, but for Rita, that image and the lived experience have finally broken apart. The photo goes on the wall, the dissonance goes in her gut, and from this point on, every perfect family moment will carry the echo of this failed reset, pushing her closer to asking what Dexter is really doing when he's not by their side. That dissonance in her gut doesn't go away. It lingers in the quiet moments, the empty side of the bed, the half-cleared dinner table, the kids asking where Daddy is again. From a woman who once measured danger in bruises and broken bones, this new kind of absence feels harder to name. To keep this clear, we have to go back to Rita's first awakening with Paul. Back then, The pattern was obvious. The booze on his breath, the missed visitation, the violent outburst followed by the tearful apology. She learned to recognize the cycle of relapse and regret, to see how every promise he made was just another step in a plan to keep control of her. When she finally said no more, it was because the abuse was undeniable, written on her body and her kids' faces. With Dexter, the investigation starts with nothing that blatant. No slammed doors, no screaming, just a series of small failures that, at first, she forgives on reflex. He's late from work. He misses Astor's recital. He forgets a date night they'd circled on the calendar. Each time, he offers a calm, reasonable explanation. A case ran long. Forensics backlog. Traffic. And for a while, gratitude does the rest of the work. How can she question the man who helped her stand up to Paul, who tucked the kids in when they had nightmares? But as this season of her life unfolds, those moments stop feeling isolated. They start to stack. She remembers that last week he said he was at the station, but this week, the story shifts to helping a friend. She notices he changes the subject when she asks who that friend is. The focus is not just on what Dexter says, but on how he says it. The slight pause, the distant look, the way his eyes flick away when she presses too hard. Isn't that the same evasiveness she once saw when Paul swore he was clean? We see this crystallize when Rita quietly tests the waters with someone safe, maybe a conversation with a friend over coffee or a late-night call to a family member. She doesn't accuse, she floats a feeling. Something feels off. He's gone a lot lately. I don't know if I'm overreacting. The central question for her isn't, is Dexter bad? It's, am I broken for doubting him? That's the paradox. For a survivor, suspicion can feel like infidelity. Every doubt feels like a betrayal of the man who saved her, even as her own history is telling her to pay attention. So she starts doing what she once did with Paul, but in a quieter key. She notes the time he leaves versus the time he says he got called in. She remembers he claimed a double shift on a night she saw no exhaustion in his face. She mentally cross-checked stories. Was that work emergency on a weekday or a Sunday? This is not a formal investigation. It's the slow, private recalibration of a woman who's finally treating her life like data instead of wishful thinking. And Dexter feels it. He catches the longer looks across the table, the way her follow-up questions land a little heavier. In this video, we're going to keep tracking how his response swings wildly between charm and defensiveness. One night, he's the perfect husband, making pancakes with the kids, overcompensating with affection. The next, he bristles when she asks where he's been, his voice just a shade too sharp before he reins it back in. That oscillation is its own tell. If there's nothing to hide, why does he feel like a man whose plan is under review? Along the way, Rita's internal trajectory shifts from denial to pattern recognition. She hasn't uncovered the code, the kills, or the dark passenger. She doesn't know what Dexter is really doing when he disappears into the night. But there's a crucial change. She stopped giving him automatic benefit of the doubt. The illusion of a perfectly safe husband has a crack running straight through it now. And when the Trinity Killer finally walks into their orbit, that crack is exactly where the impact is going to land. That crack in Rita's trust is barely formed when the universe hands Dexter the perfect patch, a bigger monster. News anchors whisper about the Trinity Killer. Crime scene photos never shown on air leak through police chatter. A woman bludgeoned in a bathroom. A jumper from a building. A mother bled out in a bathtub while her children sleep nearby. From the outside, this is just the headline horror of the season. For Rita, this is the shape of every nightmare she's been outrunning since childhood. Let's kick things off with that contrast. Paul was violent. Her mother's partners were cruel. But Trinity is the fully evolved version of the family destroyer, the ultimate escalation of the threat she's always anticipated in the dark. The focus is not just on Arthur Mitchell's ritual, it's on how his existence confirms Rita's core fear. Men who look normal can erase a family in a single night. And here's the paradox that locks into place. When the news insists that the real monster is out there, somewhere else, Dexter suddenly looks safer by comparison. He's not perfect. He's distant, distracted, sometimes gone at odd hours. But he's also the man in law enforcement, the blood guy on the investigation, the one who explains the case in calm, clinical terms while she clutches the kids a little tighter. In a world where Trinity exists, Dexter's weirdness reads as stability. We watch Rita's psychology shift. She double-checks the locks. She worries about Astor walking home alone. She insists on alarm systems, neighborhood vigilance, all the visible forms of control that a survivor clings to when the news cycle turns predatory. At the same time, her gratitude toward Dexter deepens. How lucky is she thinks, that her husband is on the side of good. How many families wish they had someone like him watching over them? To keep this clear, Dexter is running a double game the entire season. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this gap between intention and outcome, and Trinity is one of the cleanest examples. Dexter's plan is simple in his head: hunt this killer, satisfy the code, and use the fear in the air as emotional cover. Every late night, every missed call, every unexplained absence can be reframed as sacrifice. Isn't he out there protecting them from men like Trinity? Rita feels the tension, but she redirects it outward. Instead of interrogating Dexter's trajectory, she interrogates the world. Is the house safe enough? Are the kids supervised enough? Is Trinity close? Dexter leans into the protector role, reassuring her with half-truths, letting her anxiety orbit around the external threat so it never has to settle on him. And this is where the consequences turn chilling. The more Rita trusts Dexter to keep the family safe from this distant monster, the closer he actually brings Arthur Mitchell into their orbit. School visits, friendly chats, a fractured father confiding in another family man. Each contact is framed as part of the investigation, when in reality, it's the slow collapse of the barrier Rita thinks exists. She locks the doors at night. She checks on the kids. Then she lies down beside the man she believes is their shield, unaware that he is actively building a relationship with the very killer who will end her story. The central question becomes painfully simple. What happens when the monster you fear is used to hide the monster you live with? So why does Dexter suddenly look like the husband Rita always deserved right before her story ends in blood? Why does everything at home seem to improve just as we and Dexter are racing toward the collapse he can't see coming? To keep this clear, we have to place his perfect husband 2.0 phase directly under the shadow of Trinity. Once Dexter realizes Arthur Mitchell has a wife, kids, a house, a routine, he doesn't just track a target, he studies a lifestyle. We watch him sit at Trinity's family dinner table, absorbing the choreography of grace, prayer, and small talk. The way Arthur's domestic mask stabilizes his double life. Dexter's plan becomes obvious. Copy the cover while he completes the investigation. Suddenly, he's home more. He shows up for school events he used to forget. He leans into bedtime stories, diaper changes, visible affection. There's that scene where he cancels a kill opportunity to go on a family trip, not because he's transformed, but because Trinity has taught him that the best camouflage is consistency. These aren't random bursts of tenderness. They're calculated adjustments in a control system that's being stress tested by a more experienced predator. And from Rita's perspective, this is the payoff she's been waiting for. After seasons of late nights, vague explanations, and emotional distance, she finally sees a trajectory that makes sense. Dexter is present. He's attentive. He's touching her more, looking her in the eye, actually seeming relieved to be at home instead of using home as an alibi. The man she defended to her friends, to her own history with Paul, starts to line up with the man she's living with. The focus is not just on Dexter's behavior, but on Rita's psychology. As a survivor of abuse, she's trained herself to downplay danger if it comes wrapped in stability. When Dexter leans into this new role, it doesn't just feel nice. It feels corrective. The doubts from the methadone lie, the bruises from Paul, the uneasy sense that something is off with Dexter, all of that gets reframed as a rough patch they've worked through. Isn't this what growth looks like? The tragic irony is brutal. Dexter's genuine fascination with Trinity's family man, Fade, bleeds into his own life so seamlessly that even he starts to believe the performance. We see him mimic Arthur's small rituals, from household repairs to shared breakfasts, as if importing another killer's domestic script will stabilize his own. But every improvement at home is tethered to the very man who will destroy it. This creates a honeymoon 2.0 that's less about romance and more about emotional whiplash. Rita's second awakening, the moment she began to question Dexter again, is partially reversed by this surge of good behavior. Her attachment deepens just as the danger spikes. Along the way, we feel the tension. Dexter, playing perfect husband by day, stalking Trinity by night. Two worlds accelerating toward contact. And when those worlds finally intersect, when Rita's renewed faith is forced into the same frame as Arthur Mitchell's ritual, Dexter's upgraded cover won't just fail. It will turn the person it was meant to protect into collateral damage. That collision doesn't start with blood in a bathtub. It starts with luggage by the door. We're in the middle of what should be one of Rita's safest fantasies, a family trip, a literal road out of trauma and into the life she's fought to build. She's juggling kids, sunscreen, and snack bags, narrating hotel plans and beach time, trying to script a memory where Dexter is present, grounded, normal. Dexter, meanwhile, is already gone. His eyes are on Arthur Mitchell's car, on license plates and timelines, on a plan that has nothing to do with Disney brochures or booster seats. To keep this clear, the logistics are simple. Rita expects a husband. Dexter is preparing to be a hunter. When he abruptly announces that he has to work, we watch the familiar choreography snap into place. Rita pauses. There's that half second where disappointment hits first, raw and unfiltered, then the practiced understanding slides over it like a mask. She smiles, she nods, she tells herself and the kids that daddy's job is important. Once again, work outranks the family that was supposed to heal her. On the surface, it's a minor domestic letdown. Underneath, it's the purest expression of Dexter's central delusion. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this gap between what Dexter thinks he's doing and what actually happens. He tells himself that following Trinity out of town is an act of protection. Catch Arthur, end the cycle, make the world safer for Rita, for Astor, for Cody, for Harrison. Abandonment becomes security. Emotional absence becomes a necessary sacrifice in the larger investigation he's running in his head. But look at the trail he leaves behind. Missed calls from Rita stacking up while he sits in a parked car. Voicemails about mundane family matters, flight times, packing questions, a kid meltdown, playing under shots of him surveilling Arthur's house. Trinity doesn't just dominate Dexter's schedule. He colonizes Dexter's attention, displacing every obligation that lives in that bright suburban kitchen. The focus is not just on Dexter's operational failure here, it's on the relational collapse he can't even feel. We hear Rita's voice on the phone, slightly strained, asking when he'll be back, making a small joke that lands like a plea. We see the resigned look when she hangs up, the way she adjusts the story for a neighbor or a friend. He got called in again. You know how it is. How many times can she come second to something he won't name before the psychology of safe husband breaks down? Along the way, the irony curdles. Dexter believes he's compartmentalizing flawlessly. Family in one box, hunting in another. Code as the bridge that keeps both worlds intact. In reality, this trip he doesn't take, this road he doesn't drive, sets the trajectory for everything that follows. By chasing Trinity instead of staying with Rita, Dexter doesn't just leave his family unprotected, he hands Arthur the one thing he was never supposed to have. Time. Time alone with Rita's unguarded life. Time to find the hole in Dexter's lie and step directly through it. And that timing, the missed vacation, the delayed return, the airport homecoming that never happens the way Rita imagined, is exactly what will bring Trinity's ritual into her bathroom and replay Dexter's origin story on his own child. So, when we cut to Dexter at the airport, rolling his suitcase through fluorescent light and generic carpet, we're watching a man who thinks the episode is over. In his mind, the investigation is closed, the monster is dead, and the plan has finally worked. Trinity's on his table. The code was followed. Now it's just a flight home, a vacation to pick back up, a family life to slide back into. That's the first cruelty. We know what he doesn't. Every relieved breath he takes is time Rita doesn't have. Let's kick things off from his point of view, because that's how the show frames it. Dexter's checking messages like a normal husband. He hears Rita's voicemail about changing plans, about coming back early, about trying to juggle kids, flights, and a husband who's always one step removed. On the surface, it's mundane logistics. Underneath, it's a timestamp on a narrowing corridor of safety. Every unanswered call, every call me when you land, becomes a marker in the countdown he doesn't know he's on. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Trinity finding Rita, but on how Dexter's misplaced confidence opens the door. He assumes the threat is neutralized the moment Arthur's heart stops. He assumes the code has contained the danger. But Trinity has already been to the house. He's already seen the cracks in Dexter's lie. The failure isn't that Dexter kills Arthur too late. It's that he ever believed he could compartmentalize this war from his family in the first place. So, what do Rita's final hours likely look like? Not a horror movie chase. A woman at an airport counter, rebooking a flight. A mother strapping a baby into a car seat, navigating traffic, thinking about sunscreen and hotel check-in times. A survivor who has finally convinced herself she picked a safe man this time, trusting that when Dexter said he was handling it, he actually was. The central question haunting this reconstruction is simple. How much of her last day did she spend feeling normal? Then Trinity arrives. His ritual tells us the rest. A domestic space. A bathtub. A woman alone. No witnesses. No grand speech we get to hear. Just the silent repetition of a pattern Dexter thought he'd interrupted. Rita, who crawled out of Paul's violence and rebuilt a home from scratch, dies in a tableau that mirrors Trinity's earlier victims, and, thematically, Dexter's own mother. From Dexter's side, the crime scene is pure collapse. Blood in the tub. Harrison sitting in it, crying on the tile. The origin image of his life, replayed, but this time, he's the one who brought the killer home. From Rita's narrative, she's both collateral damage and the final verdict on his fantasy of control. His code didn't protect the innocent. It put a target on them. And because the show keeps her death off screen. We're forced to do what Dexter never does. Sit with the consequences, imagine the fear, fill in the emotional blanks. That distance makes it worse. We can't save her. We can only replay the missed calls. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that last image, Harrison in his mother's blood. It's the moment Paul's early suspicions are vindicated. The proof that the danger around Dexter was always real, just delayed, and it sets the trajectory for every relationship he will destroy next. We're back in that bathroom. Dexter holding Harrison, framed by tile, tape, and blood. It looks like a crime scene photo, but it reads like an autopsy shot of an entire fantasy. The marriage, the house, the kids. The idea that he could have a normal life and a secret life without one eventually killing the other. Let's kick things off by rewinding to Dexter's first plan. He doesn't choose Rita because he loves her. He chooses her because she's damaged. A domestic abuse survivor, sexually withdrawn, with an ex-husband in prison, and no bandwidth to investigate anything. She's a perfect cover. From day one, every real smile, every backyard barbecue, every bedtime story is laid over a foundational lie. You are safe with me. The central question is not whether he grew to care about her. It's whether that care ever outweighed the original calculation. To keep this clear, we have to talk about Rita's psychology, her trauma history, her need for safety, and her almost painful capacity for forgiveness create ideal conditions for Dexter's mask. She's primed to explain away odd behavior. Late nights, work, emotional distance. He's just not like other men. When Paul rages, Dexter's quiet feels like sanctuary. The very traits that make her a survivor, adaptation, rationalization, hope, become the soil where Dexter's double life thrives far longer than it should. Along the way, the investigation of their relationship is marked by near escapes. Paul's warnings that Dexter isn't what he seems. The methadone ultimatum, where Rita literally tells Dexter she will leave if he lies again. The financial fights over the house, where his secret spending and absences almost snap the illusion. The second awakening of suspicion, when his stories stop lining up and she feels that flinch of danger in her gut. Each time we watch the same pattern, Dexter manipulates, apologizes, redirects, and Rita chooses hope over fear. Is that weakness, or is it the only way she knows to keep her family from collapsing? The narrative cruelty is that Rita doesn't die because she stays broken. She dies because she heals. She goes back to work, sets boundaries with Paul, initiates intimacy, pushes Dexter to show up as a real partner. She builds a genuine life around a man who was never fully in it. The more she steps into strength, the more catastrophic his absence becomes. Her murder by Trinity is not a random tragedy. It's the final consequence of Dexter inviting a monster into the orbit of a woman who believed his protection was real. In that light, her death retroactively validates everything the show once framed as overreaction. Paul's accusations, Astor's anger, every instinctive flinch Rita had when Dexter vanished into the night. They were not melodrama, they were near misses. And yet, once she's gone, Rita becomes louder. In this video, we're going to see how her absence stalks Dexter more relentlessly than any detective, turning her story into the hidden architecture of his eventual downfall. Once Rita is gone, the silence around Dexter doesn't feel peaceful anymore. It feels radioactive. The absence at that bloody bathtub is not just grief. It's a permanent crime scene in his psychology that no cleanup plan can touch. Let's kick things off with the difference. Dexter has lost people before and after. Brian, Dokes, Miguel, even Deb. Those deaths fit inside the code. They become necessary sacrifices, operational failures he can file under the life I have to live. Rita is the one loss that will not stay in that drawer. How do you tell yourself you only kill killers when the most innocent person in your life dies as a direct consequence of your double life. We watch that destabilizing guilt immediately rewire him. From the moment he finds Harrison crying in that blood, Dexter isn't just replaying Arthur Mitchell's pattern, he's replaying his own origin. Short sentence. Short sentence. Long echo. He has recreated the very trauma that made him, and there is no investigation, no ritual, no slide that can rationalize that away. To keep this clear, look at what happens with Astor and Cody. They don't need proof of his crimes. Their psychology only needs a pattern. Their father was an addict. Their mother chose a man who is always gone when disaster hits. From their point of view, Dexter is the common denominator in every collapse of their so-called safe home. Astor's rage in later seasons is not teenage melodrama. It's the blunt verdict Rita never got to deliver. You were supposed to protect us, and you brought the monster inside. And along the way, every later relationship Dexter attempts is haunted by that verdict. Lumen, Hannah, even the half-hearted stabs at normalcy and new blood are all framed by a ghost question. If the last woman who believed in his goodness ended up in a bathtub, what does intimacy cost? The focus is not just on whether Dexter can feel love, but on whether his presence in any domestic space is itself a lethal variable. The show keeps her present to make that point. The empty house. The kids shuttled in and out of his orbit. Flashbacks to Rita's small kindnesses and mundane routines, dropped right before or after Dexter makes another catastrophic choice. She becomes a silent judge, not through speeches, but through contrast, the life she thought she was building versus the body count it masked. This is where Rita quietly replaces Harry and Deb as Dexter's true moral mirror. Harry gave him a code that turned murder into a project. Deb gave him desperate loyalty that kept extending the lie. Rita gave him something neither of them could, a non-negotiable standard of safety. She believed she was building a normal life with him. Reality answered that belief with her death. Which brings us back to the central question of the series. Can a monster ever truly have a normal life? Or does every attempt at domesticity just expand the blast radius? Rita's arc is the experiment and the result. Dexter's illusion of control doesn't just crack with her, it shatters. Then limps forward in denial. From this point on, every plan he makes carries her shadow, and the story never really lets him outrun it. We cut between Paul's hand slamming into a wall, Rita flinching in the kitchen, and Dexter standing in her doorway with flowers, speaking in that weirdly calm monotone. No yelling, no demands, no pressure. The central question becomes obvious. How does someone who survived that first man end up choosing this one? To keep this clear, we have to reconstruct Rita's internal logic. After Paul, she doesn't actually want excitement. She doesn't want the grand romance, the dangerous spark, the man who sweeps her off her feet. She wants predictability. Quiet, a routine where no one is throwing plates or punching walls because dinner is late. Her nervous system isn't chasing butterflies. It's scanning for any sign that things could explode again. And Dexter, at least in season 1, looks like the opposite of an explosion. He's emotionally flat. He forgets anniversaries, misses cues, offers awkward compliments, but he never raises his voice. He never pushes for sex when she's not ready. He's almost relieved when she says she's not ready at all. From a trauma psychology standpoint, that reads like safety. Her body learns, this man doesn't escalate. In this video, we're going to lean into that gap between what we see and what Rita feels. His lack of sexual pressure, for her, that is not a red flag. It's a gift. His distance, it gives her space. His politeness, the way he always asks permission to come in, to touch, to stay the night, functions like the anti-Paul. Everything about Dexter's presentation tells her, you will not be punished here. That's where her passivity enters, and we need to reframe it. Rita's tendency to smooth things over, to avoid conflict, isn't simple weakness. It's a survival strategy, drilled in by childhood and reinforced by Paul. Don't confront, don't escalate, don't ask the question that might trigger rage. So when Dexter disappears at odd hours, when he lies about the methadone, when his plan for the evening suddenly changes with no explanation, she doesn't launch an investigation. She rationalizes. She fills in the gaps with the most harmless story possible. This is the paradox that makes her trajectory so tragic. The very traits that make Dexter feel least dangerous to her, his emotional opacity, his calm, his ability to show no agitation, are the ones that make him most dangerous in reality, because he can lie without emotional tells. Paul would stomp around, slam doors, telegraph his violence. Dexter can come home from a kill, cradle her, and keep his pulse steady. Along the way, the code and the cover merge. Dexter thinks he's protecting Rita by being this quiet, controlled presence. Rita thinks she's protecting the fragile peace by never digging too deep. Two people, both avoiding conflict, both terrified of collapse, accidentally build the perfect shell for a predator. And as Rita slowly grows past that passivity, starts wanting more intimacy and more truth, we'll see how that same instinct for safety begins to push directly against Dexter's control and toward the point where his mask can't hold. Two people avoiding conflict accidentally build a shell, but Dexter doesn't just stumble into that shell, he engineers it. If we frame this like a heist, Rita is the score, and the plan is a perfect suburban alibi. To keep this clear, we need to lay out Dexter's criteria. He needs a partner who won't demand constant emotional disclosure, who won't run an investigation every time he disappears at midnight, and whose daily life makes him look aggressively normal to coworkers and cops. Boyfriend dinners, kids' birthday parties, school events where Batista can joke about family man Dexter. Every Little League game is another brick in the wall around the Bay Harbor butcher. From Dexter's point of view in Season 1, Rita is almost designed in a lab for that role. She's a domestic abuse survivor, exhausted from raising two kids alone, with an ex-husband in prison and a nervous system wired for survival, not confrontation. She's sexually avoidant, emotionally guarded, and laser-focused on Astor and Cody. For Dexter's psychology, that's ideal. He can show up with groceries, fix a broken door, play with the kids, and then vanish to stalk a target. If he's late, Rita assumes work ran long. If he's distant, she blames Paul, not him. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that gap between what Rita thinks is happening and what Dexter is actually doing. She believes she's found a safe harbor. He believes he's found the ultimate human shield. That's the chilling asymmetry. Rita sees a second chance at a gentle man who will never raise a hand to her. Dexter sees a second chance at killing forever without getting caught. As the relationship progresses, his mask gets a full upgrade cycle. Boyfriend becomes fiancé, becomes husband, becomes father. Each new role multiplies his social armor and his excuses. A fiancé running late is a red flag. A husband working late for the baby's future? Understandable. A father slipping out for diapers or methadone for a junkie brother has built-in cover stories no detective wants to puncture. Who wants to suspect the guy with the car seat and the wedding ring? And Dexter knows this. He leans into TA meetings, couples photos, the house in the suburbs, because every domestic ritual is also a tactical maneuver. The focus is not just on his code in the kill room, but on the code of normalcy he performs in daylight. Is it any accident that the more heat he draws as Bay Harbor Butcher, the more intensely he invests in family optics? Along the way, we can watch the heist start to wobble. Rita goes back to work. She pushes for more intimacy. She questions the late nights, the lies about rehab, the secretive errands. Each major section will show her moving one step closer to the truth. So the central question becomes, when does Dexter's perfect cover stop being enough for Rita and start becoming the very thing that threatens his control? So when does the mask actually slip for Rita? Not in some dramatic investigation montage. It happens in kitchens, bedrooms, parking lots, tiny moments where her body knows something is wrong before her mind can name it. Let's kick things off with the early red flags. Dexter disappears for long stretches, comes back with that eerily calm affect, and offers explanations that are precise but emotionally empty. Late nights at work. Extra reports. Helping Deb with a case. On paper, the plan is airtight. In practice, Rita is watching a man who never quite seems present after major events, who can describe logistics but never feelings. That gap is the first crack. The methadone lie is where it almost blows open. Dexter frames his absences as rehab, as an addiction to heroin. It's a partial truth in disguise. He gives Rita the shape of his darkness, compulsion, secrecy, loss of control, without revealing its content. She's furious, humiliated that everyone at work knew before she did. She pushes. Where were you? How long? Who are you really? For a second, the central question of the whole series is sitting right there in their living room. And then her trauma steps in and slams the door. Rita's history with Paul has taught her that making trouble leads to violence, abandonment, chaos. So when Dexter cries, admits to a problem, and promises to follow a code of recovery, her psychology reroutes the anger into caretaking. She accepts the narrative because the alternative, that she's built a family on a lie, is unbearable. Leela is the next near exposure. Rita sees the chemistry, the boundary crossing, the way Dexter lights up around this chaotic stranger. She doesn't know about the arson or the almost murder in the cabin, but she feels the gravitational pull. Again, she confronts him. Are you having an affair? Are you choosing her over us? Dexter counters with vulnerability, confessing to needing help, to feeling broken, to fearing his own impulses. In this video, we're going to keep seeing that pattern. He offers just enough truth to stabilize the relationship while keeping the real investigation off the table. By the Miguel Prado mess, Rita has leveled up. She's back at work, more assertive, less willing to be handled. She clocks Dexter's erratic behavior, the late-night friendship with a powerful stranger. The sudden mood swings around the Prado family. If she pushes one question further, what are you really doing with him? Why do men around you keep imploding? The entire suburban fantasy starts to collapse. Instead, both of them participate in sealing the cracks. Dexter leans harder into the devoted husband act. Rita leans harder into forgiveness, into the story that this marriage is her escape from chaos, not the engine of it. Along the way, we get a rapid fire failure montage of almost reveals, the forgotten blood on his clothes, the missed calls during kills, the hollow reassurances after near-death encounters. Each moment ends with the same haunting beat. If Rita had followed her instincts one step further, would Trinity have ever reached that bathtub? To keep this clear, these aren't just missed clues. They're rehearsals for the final catastrophic failure that's coming. Those rehearsals matter because Rita is changing while Dexter is standing still. The same woman who once apologized for taking up space is slowly, quietly becoming the one person in his life who refuses to live inside his lie. Let's kick things off with the baseline. In Season 1, Rita is the definition of reactive survival. Years of childhood trauma and Paul's abuse have trained her to shrink herself. She thanks Dexter for basic kindness. She apologizes when the kids are loud. She frames her own needs as inconveniences. Dexter looks at that and sees a perfect plan. A partner who won't probe, won't demand, won't threaten his control. But the trajectory doesn't stay there. The first inflection point is Paul. When she confronts him about his violence, calls the police, and later fights for full custody, we watch her move from, "Please don't hurt us," to "You don't get to be here." That custody battle is not just a family drama beat, it's Rita's first proactive choice to shape her life instead of surviving other people's damage. Each major section of her arc after that builds on this shift. By Season 2 and 3, that power curve steepens. She goes back to work. She initiates intimacy instead of waiting for Dexter to define the relationship. She sets boundaries around his disappearances, his supposed methadone treatment, his emotional distance. Every time she says, "This isn't enough," she is quietly destabilizing the very dynamic Dexter chose her for. The focus is not just on her independence. It's on how that independence makes his double life harder to manage. This is where Rita becomes the show's moral center. She doesn't have a code. She has a conscience. She believes in mundane, unfashionable things, honesty, presence. Parenting that shows up instead of vanishing into the night. When she pushes Dexter to be at Astor's recital, to coach Cody, to be present for Harrison, she is pressing him toward a life he cannot live without his entire psychology collapsing. How do you maintain a ritualized kill room schedule when your wife expects a real husband, not a placeholder? Along the way, these demands evolve from gentle requests into non-negotiables. She tells him therapy is necessary. She insists on real communication. She refuses to keep accepting vague excuses. In this video, we're going to keep tracking that gap between what Dexter promises Rita and what he can actually deliver, because that gap is the real investigation she's running, even if she never calls it that. And then the timing turns tragic. Just as Rita becomes strong enough to demand a true partner, just as she's buying a new house, planning a future, refusing to settle for the emotionally absent man she first met, Dexter's secret life spikes into the Trinity case. His nights get longer, the lies get sloppier, the danger creeps closer to home. By the time Arthur Mitchell finds that bathtub, Rita isn't a fragile cover story anymore. She's a fully realized threat to Dexter's illusion of control, cut down at the exact moment she was finally ready to stop living with placeholders. The next stage of Dexter's collapse begins there, with the one person who tried to pull him toward real life, lying in the same origin image he spent his whole existence trying not to repeat. Rita dies in the exact image that made Dexter. A screaming child in a room wallpapered with blood, a parent's body cooling in a red bath. This isn't just tragedy. It's the narrative snapping shut on Dexter's favorite illusion. To keep this clear, Dexter's core plan has always been architectural. He believes he can build perfect walls in his psychology, killer over here, husband and father over there, with Harry's code as the load-bearing beam that keeps everything upright. The code doesn't just tell him who to kill, it reassures him that the people he cares about will be safe as long as he follows the rules. Control the urge, control the ritual, control the collateral. That's the fantasy. Then the Trinity investigation walks in and offers him a mirror. Arthur Mitchell is the nightmare version of Dexter's future, a respectable family man, church volunteer, and meticulous serial killer, whose double life has been bleeding through the drywall for decades. On the surface, Arthur proves Dexter's thesis that you can maintain two trajectories at once. Underneath, he's the warning label Dexter refuses to read. Because Dexter doesn't just hunt Trinity, he studies him. He moves into his orbit, infiltrates the family, even tries to apprentice himself to this older predator in the hope of refining his own plan. What if, Dexter thinks, he can learn the advanced course in compartmentalization and come home a better husband, a safer monster? The focus is not just on stopping a killer, it's on upgrading his own system. And that's the structural irony that guts this season. While Dexter is out chasing Arthur across state lines, faking car trouble, staging abductions, and improvising kill rooms, he's also missing milestones, lying to Rita, and leaving his newborn son in the hands of a life he's barely inhabiting. Every time he chooses the hunt over the house, he widens the crack between his roles. Every delay in taking Trinity off the board is framed as tactical caution, but the consequences are domestic. Rita alone, Rita guessing, Rita exposed. By the time he finally kills Arthur, Dexter thinks he's closed the case. He believes the code has worked again. Isolate the threat, neutralize it, come home to the intact family that justifies everything. Then he finds Rita in that bathtub, Harrison sitting in her blood, and the entire logic of his life collapses in a single shot. His code didn't shield his family, it painted a target on them by putting a serial killer in direct collision with his most vulnerable point. Harrison in blood is more than a visual rhyme. It's the story passing judgment. The circle closes, but not as destiny, rather as proof that Dexter's plan was always a generational failure. If this is what control produces, what does that mean for the child who's just been drafted into the same origin story? That's the question hanging over everything that comes next. Harrison in blood is Dexter's origin story, looping back. Rita in blood is that origin story judged. She's not just another casualty of the investigation. She's the answer to the central question this whole series keeps circling. Can a monster borrow a normal life without destroying the person who lends it to him? To keep this clear, we have to reframe Rita. She's not a side character orbiting Dexter's plan. She's the control group. A fundamentally good, damaged person who keeps trying to build safety, colliding with a man who believes he can manage his own monstrosity through technique, ritual, and the code. From her childhood abuse to Paul to Dexter, we watch one repeating experiment. What happens when her need for protection is treated as a resource to exploit? The pattern starts early. Rita's backstory is all about survival through shrinking herself. An abusive father, an abusive husband, a life where staying small feels like control because it avoids the next explosion. Paul uses that psychology directly. He weaponizes her fear, her guilt, her desire to keep the kids safe. Every apology is leverage. Every relapse is a test of how far he can push before she breaks. Safety, for Rita, becomes a negotiation with men who promise stability while tightening the cage. Then, Dexter arrives as the opposite of Paul. Gentle, patient, sexually avoidant, in a way that feels respectful rather than rejecting. In this video, we're going to see that as the most chilling part of his trajectory. Dexter chooses Rita precisely because her trauma makes her the perfect shield. Low expectations, no probing questions, grateful for the bare minimum of consistency. Her need for a safe man becomes his cover story, his alibi, his excuse to believe he can have a family without ever being fully present. But the focus is not just on how broken she is. Rita grows. Season by season, she goes back to work, asserts boundaries with Paul, pushes for intimacy, asks where Dexter really goes at night. Her arc doesn't fail, it succeeds too late. By the time she's strong enough to want a fully present partner, Dexter has already entangled her in a web of lies she can't see, but can definitely feel. Those small investigations, questioning the methadone lie, noticing the absences, sensing the emotional vacancy are early warning sirens he keeps disabling. Each major section will show Dexter paying for those choices, but Rita's death is the moral bill coming due in one brutal image. Trinity doesn't just outmaneuver Dexter's operational control. He walks straight through the family fantasy Dexter used as armor. A bathtub, a body, a crying child. That's what every harmless omission, every deflection, every time the narrative let Dexter keep the mask buys in the end. Wasn't the whole plan to protect them? Rita is both his greatest protection and his ultimate punishment. She proves that borrowing normalcy is itself a form of violence when the lender never consents to the full truth. And once we see that, we have to ask, what does that say about every other good man with secrets this show puts in Dexter's shadow? Rita is both his greatest protection and his ultimate punishment. She proves that borrowing normalcy is itself a form of violence when the lender never consents to the full truth. And once we see that, we have to ask, what does that say about every other good man with secrets this show puts in Dexter's shadow? If we zoom out, Rita's trajectory is brutally clear. She begins as the traumatized survivor, the woman whose abusive ex and childhood scars have trained her to prioritize safety over desire, quiet over confrontation, survival over self. Dexter looks at that damage and, as we've seen, reads it as an opportunity, a plan, a guarantee that she won't investigate the gaps in his life too closely. From there, she becomes the careful chooser. She picks the man who doesn't push sex, doesn't raise his voice, doesn't seem to lose control. The central question for her is simple. Can she finally build a home where no one bleeds on the floor? For Dexter, the question is the inverse. Can he use that home as a shield while the dark passenger keeps working? Those two questions share a roof, but they do not share a reality. Season by season, Rita starts to grow past the role he assigned her. She goes back to work. She pushes back on Paul. She asks where Dexter goes, why he lies, why the methadone story doesn't add up. The unknowing accomplice begins to develop a moral center strong enough to challenge the story she's been sold, and Dexter, who believes his control is absolute, keeps assuming he can adjust the plan faster than her suspicions can catch up. That is the failure. Not a single night, not one bad decision, but a long, slow collapse of the fantasy that a life built on investigation, secrets, and a code of private justice can peacefully coexist with real intimacy. By the time Trinity enters the picture, Rita is no longer just cover. She is the proof that Dexter's double life generates the very danger he claims to protect her from. His obsession with Arthur, his misread of the threat, his belief that Harrison is safe because the monster is contained, all of it funnels her toward that bathtub. Rita doesn't die because she's weak. She dies because she believes in the fantasy Dexter is selling more than he does. She buys the image of the safe man so completely that she walks unarmed into the world his secrets have destabilized. And that's where her story cuts past fiction into our own psychology. The focus is not just on one fictional marriage, it's on our cultural fixation with damaged men who promise control, the tortured genius, the reformed bad boy, the vigilante with a code, and the real people who absorb the consequences when that image fails. How many Ritas surround every "he'd never hurt me, you just don't understand him" we hear in the real world? So here's where we land. The woman who chose the safest man in the room still dies in a bathtub, leaving another crying child in blood. That image loops the series back on itself and dares us to rewatch every Rita scene as evidence, not background. Where did she sense the cracks? Where did she rationalize them? Where would you have walked away? Along the way, we want to hear your read. Drop a comment with the moment you think Rita's fate became inevitable, or the choice where you think she could have broken the pattern. Revisit her arc with this lens. Share the timestamps that hit hardest, and if you want more deep dive breakdowns of the collateral damage characters who pay the price for other people's plans across TV, hit subscribe. There's a whole constellation of Ritas out there, and in this video, we're going to keep pulling them out of the background and into focus.